Chapter 131. The Unstained Tower, Broken, Part Roman 2. Chapter text Chapter XCVI The Unstained Tower, Broken, Part Roman 2. Taija felt the corridor she was in shiver, and dust rained down from the ceiling. She hoped Rand was giving them hell. Whoever did the wards was certainly giving her hell. She could tell that Tell was getting worried. She could practically feel his tension behind her. Well, she was doing her best. She wasn't a specialist at this kind of thing, and they were serious wards. As Erenia worked her way up the tower, she became tenser and tenser. The way the whole tower had shuddered earlier was frightening. At least there weren't many people around. A moment later, she wished she had not tempted fate with that thought when an Aes Sedai, one of the turned, came hurrying round the corner. "Oh, Erenia, do you know what is going on?" She sounded worried. "I think the tower is under attack." Oh, light, she did not know that Erenia had. Of course. They could not know everything. Erenia chose her words carefully. "Yes, the tower must be under attack. I do not know what is happening, though." "Is that Largin? Why has he—" Erenia chose that moment to strike. A simple blade of air and her former sister's head fell away from her shoulders. She stopped for a second and swallowed convulsively. She wanted to be sick. It was only the second person she had ever killed. The second person today as well. Another blameless victim of the Black Adger. She glanced back at Largin, who somehow looked mildly impressed beneath his overwhelming sense of depression, and had to swallow hard again. Aleda leant round the corner, just a quick glance. She had been right. There was a group in the hallway. 3 Aes Sedai and several soldiers. At least one warder. This would be difficult, perhaps impossible, but she was not sure she had any other option. There was no other way down in a reasonable time. She gestured the boys close. "There is a group ahead. I shall deal with the Aes Sedai. You will need to take the men. We will be outnumbered. We shall have to take them by surprise." Both boys gave her grim nods, and she held up her hand, 3 fingers outstretched, counting down with them. As she closed her fist, she stepped out, already weaving air, water, and fire at the closest of the Aes Sedai. With a crunch, the woman's body twisted. One down. The other 2 spun to meet her. Pevara and Cien, her heart sunk. She was going to die. Alone, she could match or beat either of them, if not by much, but not together. Not like this. The boys leapt past her with shouts of "For the tower." Immediately 2 soldiers fell at their blades, but the warder moved like a snake, launching into a duel with Galad, while Goin danced through the tower guards, deflecting their blades as he slashed at them. It appeared they really were as good as they thought they were. Then Aleda had no attention left to give the boys as she frantically sliced and deflected the weaves from the 2 Aes Sedai. Both impressive, loyal women of the tower. Now turned to the shadow against their wills. She threw herself to the side to dodge a bar of fire, wincing at the heat from its passing, and saw her own retaliatory weaves vanish before they came close to the 2 women. A shield beat at her connection to the power. She sliced it only for Pevara to use the distraction to fling Goin into the wall with air. So this was how she would die. Killed amidst the ruins of an institution she had helped destroy. She wove air, water, and fire to send lightning spiraling down the corridor, only for it to be deflected off a barrier of air. The tower guard were closing in on Goin as he painfully levered himself to his feet. With a smooth flourish, Galad removed the warder's hands and then took his head with the back stroke, before seeming to instantly accelerate to a sprint in aid of his brother. Too far, though, he would be too late. Suddenly, Pevara erupted into shrieking flame, and another man threw himself among the tower guard, sword flashing. Aleda did not wait to look a gift horse in the mouth. She was already redoubling her attacks on Cien. With her attention split between 2 assailants, it took only seconds before she missed a weave and crumpled to the ground, almost cut in half. "Mother," Aleda relaxed slightly. It was Erenia. Erenia had saved her. Perhaps she would survive a little longer after all. Then there was the swordsman, was that? Largin. Her heart skipped a beat. What was he doing here, with a sword, staring at her with hate painted across his face? Largin. There was a warning note in Erenia's voice, and suddenly he seemed to pull back, dull emptiness replacing the hate in his eyes. He must have helped Erenia. He was a false dragon, a male channeler. That did not mean he was a dark friend. Aleda forced herself to be reasonable. There was no time for strife. "Master Ablar, you have no reason to love me, nor I you. However, we both serve the light. Let us put everything aside other than defeating this infestation of the shadow. Any issues can be dealt with later if we survive. She held her breath for a second as he did not react, then he slowly nodded. Yes, his voice was hoarse. For now, it was good enough. Rand spun Sedin. Two full circles faced him now, he was fairly sure. A shield was sliced, and then with earth he simply heaved a section of the tower's walls onto some of the Aes Sedai before traveling once again. He'd lost count of how many Aes Sedai he'd killed today. Had no idea what they were doing, no idea how to fight when they couldn't pin him down and take him by surprise. He spun another gateway and sent a blazing beam of fire through it, carving through another too. Still, the numbers were becoming overwhelming. He couldn't let himself be captured. These weren't more of a Lada's idiots. These were direct servants of the shadow. Taija must surely be nearly done. Taija heard a rolling series of explosions down the corridor behind her and blinked. She must have gotten so distracted by the wards that she hadn't even realized Tell was fighting again. She suppressed a little spark of worry. It was going much slower than she'd hoped. Even Tell could be overwhelmed. He'd be fine. He was strong, and if he needed her, he could get her attention. She redoubled her efforts with the wards. A minute later, Taija was vaguely aware of Tell back behind her, a smell of smoke around him. She resisted the urge to look, suppressed her worry. She was nearly there. Nearly. She forced all of her strength through her webs, and the wards flickered. A blast of fire shot towards her from the door, and she neatly deflected it. Oops. Then they were gone. The room was unprotected. Taija scrambled to her feet, immediately turning to check Tell over. Okay, his clothes were scorched, but he looked fine. Nothing serious. No new scars. She turned back to the door and smashed it away like the first. Inside were display cabinets, 5 of them. One was empty, the others, oh yes. Taija spun a gateway and flung them through on webs of air in a crash of wood and glass. She was already turning away as the gateway rotated closed behind her. She met Tell's eyes, stress over the wards forgot. She was grinning now, excitement shining in her eyes. Shall we try for the Turangreal? He was more serious. No, come on, we set ourselves a time limit. There's no way we can do another room before it's up. Taija wanted to argue, but he was right. She shouldn't let herself get overexcited. Okay, fine, spoil sport. You can spin the gateway since you're no fun. She pouted at him. He ignored her with long-suffering practice, and a gateway rotated open. After you. Rand lashed out with a whip of fire, and the group of Aes Sedai threw themselves down. One unlucky one was too slow, and the top half of her body vanished. He traveled, sprinting through a gateway, spinning a blossom of fire behind him. As he emerged, he neatly sidestepped a fireball, crushing his attacker in air, and then dived into a roll under a blade of something. He could feel himself starting to flag. There must have been nearly 30 Aes Sedai fighting him at this point, not counting the 10s he'd already killed. It was too many, really. If they started coordinating properly, he'd be in real trouble. That meant it was time to leave. He was about to spin a gateway to somewhere far away when he saw more explosions near the base of the tower. Aleda emerged from the tower into what must be the largest channeling battle she had ever seen. Yet there was something not quite right. Her eyes took it in at a glance. There were bodies everywhere, dead sisters, tower guard and warders strewn across the ground. But fighting them, there seemed to be just one man. How was that even possible? She shook her head to clear the disorientation from the constant noise and explosions, and for a moment the smoke cleared. Then she saw him, a familiar-looking, tall, young, red-haired man. He dived through a hole in the air, now a gateway, and emerged flinging fire. For a few long seconds she just watched. How powerful was he? How skilled was he? A huge weave of cedar flew at him, so much power that it must have been from a full circle, razor-sharp spirit to gentle or shield. At the same time, more weaker weaves came at him from other angles. He wouldn't be able to see them. He couldn't. Yet the shield vanished, presumably sliced. Other weaves he just stifled, sliced, or simply danced around. At the same time, lightning struck around the Aes Sedai, explosions rippling out. He looked to his left, and a sister simply vanished in fire. How could he be so fast? The weaves seemed to converge on him, and then he simply moved, straight through a gateway, already attacking. She remembered that meeting back in Keemlin. Randall Thor, the dragon, it had to be. Maybe there was some hope left today. Her wide-eyed staring nearly got her killed. She barely had time to deflect a weave of air and spirit that would have torn her apart as one of the Aes Sedai spotted her. Then she was fighting for her life, and there was no time to think. Rand glanced towards the explosions. It looked like some of the Aes Sedai were fighting each other. Were there still some left who served the light? It was a split-second decision, but he wasn't going to abandon them. He could stay a few more seconds. The light needed every channeler it could get. Focusing, he spun a trio of gateways, opening them behind the Aes Sedai attacking the newcomers. A flex of his will and fire, water and spirit enveloped them, tearing them apart before they even knew they were under attack. He was really starting to see why Taija sometimes muttered about half-drained children playing at being grown-ups. A sweeping web of fire and air to blind and burn everyone around him, and he was through a gateway. As he emerged, he stumbled for the first time since he reached the tower. Was that Elada? She glanced at him before sending a fireball arcing outwards. Lord Dragon. Her voice was actually respectful. For a second he stood there stunned, and then he remembered where he was. In a flash he was spinning again. Fire, air and earth to raise smoke around them and block the vision of their attackers, darts of fire rapidly shooting out and detonating past his smokescreen. Did he even want to save Elada? He'd thought she was a dark friend. Although the evidence seemed to be against that now, he certainly still thought she was his enemy. She seemed to read his mind. I know you have no reason to love me, but trust me when I say this, for I cannot lie. I serve the light, and I swear I shall not try to harm you. Now please, I need your help. Rand still hesitated. Then he realized who the sword-wielding men with her were. 3 men that he recognized. Elaine's brothers, and of all people, Largain. Along with an Aes Sedai he didn't recognize. That made his mind up. He could always deal with Elada later, but he couldn't leave Goyne and Galad to die. Fine, but we need to get out of here now. No, Elada's vehemence was a surprise. We can't leave Rieko. Rand winced as he barely deflected a gigantic fireball. He couldn't hold here for long. Who in the light is Rieko? They're turning her now. Elada gasped the words out. She was clearly on her last legs. Somewhere in the basements. 13 Myrddraal and 13 Aes Sedai. We have to help her. Rand's stomach twisted as he realized what she was saying. A horrific fate worse than death. Shields hammered at him and he sliced them, sending a series of death gates opening and closing back after them. The Aes Sedai would probably be too stupid to get out of their way. We can't. I can't. We need to leave now. A group of soldiers, led by warders, charged out from the smoke, and before he could blow them away, Largain, Galad, and Goyne were among them, swords dancing in the smoke, barely holding them off. No, we can't leave her. Please, I beg you. Those could not be words Elada said often. Rand shook his head as he spun a gateway. If we stay, we die. We can't save her. She's gone. You can live and fight another day, if he allowed her to, or you can stay, but I'm leaving. He didn't want to leave anyone to that fate, but he knew if he stayed he risked far too much. He spun fire into the back of the group of soldiers pressing at the men, burning several of them to ash. Elada hesitated. Was she actually thinking of staying? Then her face went blank and she stepped through the gateway. Come on, Rand yelled at the men. Couldn't see round them well enough to safely attack the growing number of soldiers, especially with the ever-increasing number of webs he was having to fend off. They glanced back and started to retreat. Then Largain shouted, Go! I'll hold them off, and he'll have space to help me with his channeling. The boys hesitated and then pulled back, bundling themselves through the gateway with the other Aes Sedai. Rand staggered as a web nearly overwhelmed his defenses. Largain's sword was flashing through the air, deflecting blows. Rand carefully took a step back to the threshold of the gateway, then through it. There, he had the line of sight. Splitting his flows, he obliterated the men pressing in on Largain. Come on, man, run. More tower guard were coming, never mind the Aes Sedai. Largain turned, met Rand's eyes, hesitated, then smiled, a sad little smile. After a moment he turned back and launched himself forward, away from Rand, away from the gateway and towards the oncoming troops, sword held high above his head. Rand nearly went after him, but there were too many Aes Sedai, far too many now. With a grimace he let the gateway close, instantly cutting off the storm of attacks he'd been having to fend off. He didn't know Largain, hadn't known him, but he couldn't feel anything but sorry for the man. However, there were things he needed to do. There was no time to mourn for someone he didn't know. Turning, he slammed shields into place on both Elada and the other Aes Sedai. I think it's time we had a talk. As Taija waited with a crowd of the hall's initiates and dedicated, she was starting to get a little worried. She hadn't left things right to the agreed time limit, so she'd expected to be back before Rand, but he was definitely well overdue by then. She hoped he hadn't gotten himself into trouble. She doubted that the Black Adger would give her the chance to rescue him a second time. It was probably the stupid hero complex that so many young people had, and he was just staying and fighting longer than he should have. But if he wasn't back soon, she was going to have to go back there to try to save him. Then a gateway opened, and Taija breathed a sigh of relief as Rand emerged. He looked exhausted and rather battered, definitely like he'd been in a fight. Still, he was okay. Nothing Nynaeve couldn't heal. As he emerged, the crowd of initiates broke into cheers. As far as they were concerned, they'd made a successful raid on the tower, exacted revenge for Eben and Noruan, and killed one of the Forsaken, nothing more. Taija had sent her loot elsewhere, safely out of sight. The fewer people that knew about that, the better. It was still a huge triumph. That being said, given what she'd just been doing, she was surprised to see Verin and Alana among the cheering crowd. Although, of course, they weren't sullying their dignity by joining in. The bigger question was, where was Nynaeve? Rand could do with a bit of healing, maybe more than a bit. Taija scanned the crowd for her. Alana was advancing on the three of them, all modern Aes Sedai smoothness and dignity, Verin hustling behind her. Somehow she managed to maneuver between people, and then she was heading for Rand. I can heal the Lord Dragon. The light of Sedar appeared around her. Just before she could get within arm's reach of him, Taija embraced Sedar and slammed a shield straight through her connection to the power. A moment later, two dedicated had politely, but firmly interposed themselves between her and Rand. Alana blanched. My apologies. I thought the Lord Dragon looked like he needed healing. She raised her hands, palms open, and slowly backed away. Taija wasn't sure whether she believed her, but she hadn't actually done anything, and Rand did look like he needed healing. She'd have a word with Rand, and the dedicated later to make sure they knew that Alana wasn't to be allowed anywhere near him. It wasn't long after that Nynaeve and Alexei emerged from another gateway to more resounding cheers. Taija joined in the applause with a little more restraint. The day had been a huge success, and the hall was going to be celebrating that night. Once Rand had been healed, he took Taija aside and told her there was something he needed to show her. He was dead serious, so she didn't try to make a joke about it, and instead let him lead her through a gateway to. She thought it was somewhere in Tyr. He looked halfway between grim and nervous. What's this all about then? Oh, you'll see. He opened a door, and Taija suspected he'd untied some wards at the same time. When he gestured her through, she stepped in to see the first modern Aes Sedai she ever met, all smooth-faced calm. There were two young men there too, one of whom resembles Elaine, and another Aes Sedai she didn't recognize. However, Taija only had eyes for Elada, the woman who declared her a dark friend across the world, whose attack on her in Keemlin set her on the miserable path she'd traveled for so long. The woman who'd led the White Tower to the shadow. Taija wasn't a murderer, Elada was a prisoner, but that was the only reason she didn't smear the woman straight across the wall. Elada's eyes widened at the sight of Taija, and she actually dropped a curtsy. Taija said, our first among servants, the Lord Dragon said he would be bringing you here. Taija was already probing with spirit to make sure Elada was shielded. She was indeed all right. Her anger was already slightly mollified by Elada's respectful tone, although it didn't fit with anything she'd ever heard from or about her. What was going on? What's she doing here? Taija demanded an answer from Rand, ignoring Elada. He looked a bit awkward. I found her fighting the Black Adger in the White Tower. Believe it or not, I don't think she's a dark friend, just an idiot. One of the boys started to protest, and then subsided at a glance from Elada. I could have left her to die, but I thought it would be better to give her the choice about whether she came back with me or not. If we decide we want her dead, well, no one who isn't in this room knows she's here. Her tragic and heroic death at the White Tower can be remembered or forgotten as needed. One of the boys gasped, and the other Aes Sedai whimpered. However, the second boy decided to raise his voice in protest. How dare you speak to the Amulin like that? Taija silenced him with a web of air. Elada, however, stayed impassive. Taija was halfway between impressed and disturbed by Rand, but she could at least play along. You have a point. She turned to Elada. Everything you have done makes me think that you're a dark friend of the worst kind. How can I trust that you're not in the face of your actions and the damage you've done? Think very carefully about your answer. Elada gave her a slow nod. I admit to my failure, but I am no dark friend. I can prove it, if I may. She reached slowly down, hiking her skirts up to the widening eyes of the boys, as if they'd never seen a woman's legs before. Then she pulled out an ivory rod that looked rather familiar. I have the oath rod, and I will swear on it that I am telling the truth. Taija limited her reaction to raising her eyebrows. She needed more people here. Rand, please could you fetch Tell, Alexei, and Benny? I need you to get Benny to promise she won't reveal anything that happens here too. I trust her, but I'll keep an eye on this lot while you're gone. Of course. He gave her a nod and headed away. Taija turned back to the group. So I know who Elada is. We've met before, but who are the angry young men and who are you? She addressed the other Aes Sedai. Equals. It didn't take long for Rand to return with the others. The room was getting a bit crowded at that point. Taija had already decided that Elaine's brothers would be released to her and Morgase's care. As far as she knew, they hadn't committed any crimes, and who knew, it might even get Morgase to warm up to her. Erenia, the other Aes Sedai, could go free as long as she could show she wasn't Black Adja. As for Elada, Benny and Tell quickly agreed that Elada's binding rod was the genuine article. Taija had thought it was, but they were both rather more familiar with the things for reasons she preferred not to think about. It was quick enough to establish Erenia's affiliation to the light. Thank you. You'll be free to go once we've finished with Elada. We can drop you off with Siyun's group or elsewhere if you'd rather. Then, as Taija channeled a small flow of spirit into it, Elada gripped the binding rod. I unswear all oaths that bind me. She gritted her teeth and shuddered. I swear to speak no word that is not true. Elada released her grip on the binding rod and handed it back to Taija, who just looked at her for a second. Go on then. I am not a dark friend. I support the light. It was almost a surprise. Had she really been that incompetent then? Still, not being a dark friend didn't mean she hadn't committed crimes against the Hall. That was why Taija wanted Tell and Alexei here too. If Elada gave the wrong answer to some of Taija's questions, she felt it was enough of them to reach a consensus on the consequences for her. Very well. Why did you name me a dark friend? Elada glanced around her. Now she was showing some nervousness. Had she thought that simply not being a dark friend would be enough? To be clear, I no longer believe you to be a dark friend. However, at the time it was my honest belief. You had broken into the Keemlin royal palace. You were associated with various disasters, and my advisors had suggested it to be the case. Siyun also lied about you, or at least deceived the sitters. Elada kept on explaining herself, and despite herself, Taija could see how she could have drawn some of her conclusions, as offensive as they are. Wrong, harmful, stupid, and offensive, but not criminal. Eventually, she cut her off. Fine. Did you order the Aes Sedai led by Galena to kidnap Rand? Yes, although only if he was unwilling to come peacefully. Not surprising. What about the beatings inflicted on him? Beatings? I certainly did not order such a thing. It would have been difficult enough to deal with him without that. What about the severing of initiates of the hall? Severing? Do you mean gentling? Taija nodded, stone-faced. I did not order that. When I sent out that group, I did not even know that the Lord Dragon would have any men who could channel with him. Fuck, was she really just that much of an idiot? Why did you overthrow Siyu and Sanch? I thought she was a dark friend. I am aware of the irony. I have had a lot of time for self-reflection since she was removed. You must understand, I said I were disappearing and being assaulted, and I said I died while with her, and she lied about the cause and lied about you. Oh, I am sure she had an explanation that made it technically true, but the evidence was there. As Elada kept talking and Taija asked more questions, trying to catch her out, she groaned internally. Based on what Elada was saying, Taija wasn't sure that she could actually pin anything on her other than kidnapping Rand, and even there it seems like Galena had exceeded her orders. The conclusion was clear. Elada was an idiot, not evil. What in the light was Taija going to do with her? The binding rod was easier, that she could give to Siyun. It would be hugely beneficial to her, while being a poison pill that Siyun wouldn't even realize the nature of, restricting their lifespans, binding themselves with hard rules instead of morality. Foolishness. Chapter 132. Time for celebration. Chapter text, Chapter X6, Time for Celebration. Alexei sat back in one of the plush chairs that Taija had found from light new wear and passed her the bottle of wine. She took a gulp from it before passing it back. Well, that went about as well as it possibly could have. He glanced behind himself to where the sounds of raucous partying were coming from deeper within the hall's grounds. Taija nodded, looking as relaxed as he'd ever seen her. Yep. We got what we wanted. We almost certainly killed a Forsaken, dealt with a large part of the Black Adger, and none of us died. Couldn't have hoped for better. So are you going to be giving the binding rod to Siwan? Oh yes. It'll make her happy for once, and frankly the thing gives me the creeps. I don't like even touching it. She knows what it does to your lifespan, but I don't think she cares. She paused and looked up at the night sky. I was thinking maybe we should offer her the tower as well. I can't imagine the Black Adger will want to hang around there after what Rand did to them, and without the Forsaken we can clear them out quite easily if they do decide to stay. Interesting idea. You're trying to go on a charm offensive with Siwan. Well, sort of. We do need to work together, and I've been putting her in a difficult position for a while. She hesitated. Also, sooner or later, she's going to find out about the missing Angreal and Sangreal, and I think will look more innocent. He barked out a laugh. You're a lot more devious than people give you credit for. She didn't answer, just did her best impression of an enigmatic smile and held out her hand for the wine again. He passed it to her and she took a sip. Where's Tell anyway? You seem a bit more comfortable nowadays. Taija hesitated and then took a deeper swig before passing it back to him. You know, don't you? Alexei smiled. Of course I know. I know you too well. She gave him a sideways look and he took a drink of his own. And you're not going to start lecturing me? I can if you want. He laughed at her unamused look. I can't say I think it's the best idea, given everything, but it's your choice. In the end, I can see it's made you happy and that's what matters. Who am I to question it anyway? Taija muttered something that sounded a lot like the one person I'd actually listened to. Alexei smiled to himself. Of course he was, and she really needed to learn that she wasn't as quiet as she thought she was when she muttered things. Then Taija perked up and looked straight at him, and his heart skipped a beat, nervousness flaring. He knew that look. He might be in trouble. Speaking of romance, he was in trouble. Why is there no one in your life? She paused. There isn't, is there? No nice girl in your life? No, there isn't. I don't know. I've just been very busy, you know. Caught off balance, he tried to dissemble. Is it that you don't like girls? Should we find you a nice boy? Some of the ale men have pretty tight backsides. Alexei spat out the wine he'd been drinking, spraying it across himself. Not a boy, then. Taija stretched languorously, amusement shining in her eyes. There must be a nice young lady who's caught your eye, though. You can't just go trailing round after me until you get old. Remember, being Aes Sedai means having balance, not just service. Alexei sighed. Like I said, I'm just too busy. The closest I seem to come to women is trying to avoid this one ale maiden who's always... He trailed off. Taija looked far too interested. Oh no, don't stop, keep going. She always seems to be there wherever He trailed off again. She hadn't. It must be her assignments, but apparently she hasn't requested anything, and it seems like a very big coincidence. Surely not. Taija snorted, unable to contain herself. Oh, for light's sake, Taija. She started giggling. Your face. Eventually her laughter subsided under his glare. Fine, but seriously, you need to get laid. It took him a second to work out what she meant by that, then his face went red. She could be so crude sometimes, not at all ladylike. I do not. Anyway, it's none of your business. This was part of the problem with your friend being old enough to be your great-grandmother. She often did when she felt something was inconvenient to the point she wanted to make. Taija ignored that. Come on, she's into you. She's an awesome fighter and she's super hot. Haven't you noticed? Despite his best efforts, he blushed harder. Taija noticed and pounced. Oh, you have noticed. You could crack nuts on her ass, and I reckon underneath the cadencer she's got fantastic tea. Alexei leapt to his feet. Fine. You know what? I'm going to go and speak to her right now. Anything to get Taija to stop. He spun on his heel and stalked away to the sound of Taija's cackling. Benny took a dignified sip of wine. She was sat with Verin and Alana at a slight remove from the partying initiates. It felt like a pity that she was there, rather than in the middle of them. Not that she wanted to party with a group of youths, but she had to admit the hall had grown on her, and the separation she maintained could be saddening when she had so few peers for company. Verin was fine, and of course Taija was entertaining, but she missed her networks of friends in the tower. Most of them likely dead, turned or traitors now. She resisted the urge to sigh. Still, she had also been thinking, ever since Taija had dropped the bombshell on her about the impact of the oath rod. The woman had not even known what she was saying. What an earth-shaking revelation it was. She had said she was planning to return the oath rod to Siuan as a gift. A noble gesture, anyone would say, but another crippling blow to the White Tower's Aes Sedai. She had not, however, mentioned informing Siuan of the impact on those Aes Sedai's life expectancy. It was fascinating. Taija preached sisterhood and cooperation, and as far as Benny could tell, believed it with every fiber of her being. However, just occasionally, she would show flashes of almost respectable cunning. Based on everything Taija had said, Benny would have thought that she would be desperate to help Siuan in every way possible. Yet then she did something like this, handing over a gift that was desperately wanted by the White Tower, yet drastically weakened them at the same time. It was admirable. She really was a woman of many facets. Siuan will no doubt be delighted when the oath rod is returned to her. Verin nodded. Indeed, has Taija said when that will be happening? It will be good for Siuan to be able to truly raise new Aes Sedai once more. I think it will be at least 2 or 3 days. Taija mentioned wanting to have some sort of friendship ceremony to go with it. Because of course she would want that. Soft or devious. Oh well, that will be wonderful. I had been wondering what would happen without access to the oath rod. Siuan could not hold off on raising new Aes Sedai forever. It would have been fascinating to see what solutions she explored, but much better, of course, not to need to do that. I suppose she will just keep it here until then, close to her. I suppose that would be safest. Benny let Verin's absent-minded prattling wash over her, her mind going back to thoughts that she had been having for a while. She could not truly say she was a great fan of Siuan's, and the White Tower itself had been taken over by the Black Adger. She had had a long life, it was true, but there was so much more to be done. Inalea watched as Yer jumped high in the air with a kick, leaping over the blazing fire that someone had started. She knew she was drunk, but that was fine, so were half the people here. Still, she wasn't the only one watching him. He really was a fine figure of a man, if only he didn't have such an ale stick up his backside. Tell glanced at Alexei as the man powered by, looking rather more annoyed than normal. Best not to ask. He turned his attention back to the group of initiates with their disparate instruments. That was excellent. Keep up the good work. After a moment, they went back to their previous tunes. He'd agreed with Taija that he and Nynaeve wouldn't be drinking tonight, given the need to make sure some people were unimpaired. That didn't mean he couldn't have fun. With a small smile, he leant back against a wall and watched initiates dancing, some more enthusiastically than others. Wildly different styles. Social class and age largely forgotten as they pranced around each other. It was chaotic, and it was exactly how it should be. It was good to be building something like this again. He wasn't sure how long he stood there watching contentedly before he felt a familiar presence by his side. He'd never been able to work out how she sometimes managed to just appear or disappear like that. They look happy, don't they? She leant into him slightly, her small form a comforting weight against him. They do. Hopefully it'll last. Sooner or later they'll have to fight. But we'll get them as ready as they can be, and it's good that they can have fun until then. They stood in comfortable silence for a minute, and then Tell smiled. I have a surprise for you. Come on. He pushed himself off the wall and headed back toward the band. Taija quickly followed, keeping a more decorous distance now that they weren't standing in the shadows. What is it? Tell me. He could tell she was resisting the urge to grab at him and make puppy eyes. Come on, you're not meant to keep secrets. What is it? Is it chocolates? It wouldn't be a surprise if I told you. He ignored her grumbles until he reached the band. Can you play it, please? You know what I mean. Under the starry sky, lit by flickering balls of Sedin and Sedar, he headed for the flat space that had been turned into a dance floor, Taija trailing behind him. Behind them, the music stuttered to a halt, and initiates started to move away. There was no more music to dance to, and they could see the two of them approaching. Then the band started again, the eerie, familiar 1, 2, 3 beat to the music echoing out across the open space. Taija stopped dead, her eyes widening. Tell didn't wait for her to say anything. He gave her a low bow with a flourish that wouldn't have been out of place in the highest class balls of Paran Disen before holding his right hand out to her, palm up. A moment's hesitation, her eyes still wide, and a glance around at the crowd of initiates. Then Taija stepped forward and put a much smaller hand in his. A quick lift of his left hand to twirl her, and as she spun his right hand dropped to her shoulder blade, feeling her slim warmth under it as his left hand clasped hers. Then they were off, spinning across the ground to the beat, feet moving in patterns long ingrained in them, even if they hadn't danced together like this since the early days of the war. As they came towards the initiates, he smoothly tilted his elbow down, made a bigger step, and they rotated round each other to head away again. Taija should technically have been leaning back and looking over to her left, if she was doing this properly. Instead, she was looking up at him, eyes shining. He'd been surprised she'd enjoyed this kind of dancing so much back in the day, given her hate for formality. But then her refusal to do any of the traditional, uncomfortable bits made up for that. Despite that, she never missed a step, feet moving smoothly with his. Together they swung across the ground, eyes only on each other as the band clumsily played out a long-forgotten tune from a long-dead time. Eyes only for each other. If he closed his eyes, he could imagine it was one of the balls he'd taken her to before the war. All too soon the music came to an end, and he spun her out, away from him, with a flourish of his right arm, ending up facing each other, arms outstretched and joined only by their hands. He finished the dance with a low bow, matched by hers, her deep brown eyes never leaving his. Light, she was beautiful. Then suddenly reality returned as he remembered all the initiates were still there. Taija wasn't going to be happy if he just put their relationship on display for everyone to see. He thought fast. And that, everyone, was a traditional dance from the Age of Legends. If you ask me nicely enough, I might teach it to some of you next week. Now let's all thank Taija Sedai for her kind assistance with that demonstration. As the crowd broke into applause, he gave Taija a polite bow. Arena knew she was a little drunk, well more than a little. However, she wasn't going to let that distract her from what she'd just seen. She leant over to Inalea and Kalanin. I told you they were lovers. That was so sweet. I do not see why dancing together means they must be doing more than that. Can a man and a woman not be friends? I have spent time with many maidens of the spear without any need to give them courtship gifts. It took her a second to work out what Kalanin was saying, but once she did, she shook her head at the ailman. Don't ridiculous. Didn't you see the way they were looking at each other? Anyway, Taija said I has him wrapped firmly around her finger. It's obvious. Inalea made a vaguely noise of agreement. Certainly, if they're not already, they soon will be, but that's none of our business, and don't you forget it. Still, I'd like to learn that dance. Mazrim Tame ignored the sound of partying from around the building and knocked firmly on the door. He waited a few seconds for an answer, and when none came, opened it anyway. There was a faint smell to the room, a suggestion of someone who had let their hygiene go somewhat. Tame sighed to himself. He did not even really know what he was doing here. Norluin. The man did not react. Norluin. After a moment, the merchant opened his eyes and propped himself up on his elbows to look blearily at Tame. Where he had been portly before, he was rapidly losing weight now. He certainly did not look at all healthy. Tame looked Noryuan over and almost turned on his heel to walk out. This weakness, it was what the eyes said I would have done to him if Demandrid had not saved him. It made him feel ill just to think about it. How are? He stopped. He never knew what to say. The party is quite noisy outside. They are celebrating revenge against the White Tower, you know, revenge for what they did to you. That got him a weak smile. What was one meant to say to a man in this condition? He kept the irritation out of his tone with an effort and sat down on the bed beside Noryuan. I thought that you would not want to be out among them, and I doubt I would be welcome with them. So I brought this. He held up the wine skin. Thank you, Mazrim, but it's not necessary. Noryuan's voice was dry. Tame was not a man to pretend to be jovial, and this would be no exception. So instead he just scowled. I will decide what is necessary or not. Now drink, or else I will be drinking this alone. He pulled the cork from the skin and took a swig before handed it to Noryuan. The man stared at it for a few seconds and then tilted it to his mouth, taking a deep swig before passing it back to Tame. As Tame took another gulp of his own, he studied the other man out of the corner of his eye. Eben had Helena to keep him alive. Well, he would make sure that Noryuan survived too, in his own way. Helena worked her spoon into the hard earth again before pulling it out, removing a small amount of dirt. Eben knelt beside her doing the same. You know, you should really go and join the others. Enjoy the party. You don't have to be here. I'll be fine by myself. He gave her a slow look. Everything about him seemed to be slow these days, but his eyes were focused in a way they hadn't been when she'd first bonded him. She was spending every waking minute on menial, meaningless labor, but the way he actually focused on her made every second worthwhile. No, I don't think I'd want that. To be honest, there's nowhere else I'd rather be. You're a fool, Eben, she declared immediately, but with a fair bit of affection in her tone. She almost missed the shadow looming towards them from the darkness. As it resolved itself into the form of Aes Sedai, she resisted the urge to spring to her feet. Like every initiate, she knew that the appearance of an Aes Sedai was not an excuse to slack off from her work. Instead, she gave a respectful dip of her head. Aes Sedai. Eben echoed her a moment later. The older woman didn't say anything for a while, just standing over them watching, while Helena redoubled her efforts at digging. She wasn't sure what additional punishment she could be given, but Nynaeve said I had a temper and she had no desire to find out. She was just starting to wonder whether she should say anything when the eyes said I spoke. All right, Helena, you're done for the day. Helena looked up, but Taija said I. I know what Taija said I said. Am I not Aes Sedai too? Nynaeve said I didn't wait for an answer. You'll be back here tomorrow, but for today, go to your room or Eben's room and have a break. The whole hall is celebrating today. Go. Nynaeve held out a skin of something, wine perhaps to her. It was all done with Nynaeve Sedai's usual brusqueness, and it took Helena a few seconds to realize that she wasn't being punished further. She hurriedly got to her feet and gave Nynaeve a low bow, no curtsies in the hall. Thank you, Aes Sedai. Chapter 133. Interlude Roman 32. 3 cheers for Lord Matt. Chapter text, Interlude Roman 32, 3 cheers for Lord Matt. A few days ago, Lord Kavlan looked nervously around himself as his file of cavalry carefully worked their way away from the Erenin. He had been with the second group that had been going to cross directly into Erringil. With Andor leaderless and weakened after the strife, it had been through. Holding both banks of the river would have been of huge advantage to Kerhian in general and his house in particular. He could only bless the Creator that he had not been in the first group across the river. That meant that he had had the opportunity to see lightning flashing down from the cloudless sky, sending Kerhian in bodies flying off the docks rather than being among them. He had also seen some of the boats trying to cross the river burst into flame or simply explode, depositing screaming cargoes into the river's waters where, weighed down by their armor, the soldiers had sunk into the Erenin's murky depths never to be seen again. That was why he and his men had crossed upstream, away from whatever Aes Sedai witchcraft was defending Erringil. It must have been some of the dragon's pet Aes Sedai, since the tower was on Kerhian's side. Andor had always been too close to the White Tower, but that had changed with their new rivals. Regardless, it seemed crossing upstream had not been enough. Worried messengers had appeared and vanished, speaking of a mysterious force of Andoran troops that seemed to hit Kerhian in forces at the exact worst moment possible. There must have been tens of thousands of them in the countryside around Erringil, for wherever Kerhian in forces went they met opposition, hitting them unexpectedly and then fading back into the forest and hills that surrounded the town. With the dragon safely in the hands of the White Tower, it should have been impossible. Andorans could not have anticipated this, or the dragon would never have come to Kerhian, and even if they had, his spies should have detected the build-up of their army. With a lurch in Lord Kavlan's stomach, another thought occurred to him. He had heard that Morgase had returned to Andor and dismissed it as a trick of the dragon, or at worst that she was now a powerless puppet of his. What if that was not true? She was a wily woman. What if she had known of Kerhian and the Aes Sedai's plans and played them all? Giving the dragon to the White Tower to regain her independence and being ready for the Kerhianin invasion at the same time. Andor always had been close to the White Tower, and Lord Kavlan had no doubt that the Tar Valon witches would have been perfectly happy to treat him as a pawn to be sacrificed to get control of the dragon and bring Andor back into the fold at the same time. He turned to his second, Lord Najal. Thwack. Lord Kavlan looked behind him to see his adjutant collapsing, an arrow through his throat. Then another soldier went down, and another. As he started shouting orders, he felt a piercing pain through his chest. There were Kerhianin bodies everywhere. Matt had no idea how he'd ended up in this situation, but it was probably Elaine's bloody fault. Lord Matt this, Lord Matt that. He went for a quiet ride, and now he found himself with almost 2,000 troops under his command. Andorans and mercenaries alike. All of them relying on him while he just wanted to get back to bloody Eringil, grab Elaine, and tell her to spin one of her gateways back to Keemlin for reinforcements like anyone sane would. The flaming Kerhianin had decided to invade, and like any sensible man, he had wanted to make himself scarce. But he could hardly leave Elaine behind when they were sure to overrun Eringil. So instead, like the light-blinded fool he was, he turned his horse around to ride for Eringil. Except things were never that simple in reality. First, he blundered into Andoran troops, just in time to save them from an ambush. Then another group, then some mercenaries, then a local lord's levy. At the same time, more and more Kerhianin were crossing the Erenin until it felt like he was in a running battle for survival, all as he tried to make his way back towards Eringil to rescue Elaine. Like some idiot from a romantic story, when any normal man would just have turned around and ridden as far as he could from royalty, Aes Sedai, or bloody Kerhianin. Elaine paced the walls of Eringil, looking out with worried eyes. Really, she should be going for help and reinforcements, but she could handle this. It would be fine. The Kerhianin had no idea what they were doing, the fucking idiots. She was a full Aes Sedai. She'd heard enough lectures from Taija about how to demolish troops who could not use the power. Also, Matt was somewhere out there, and she refused to leave him to his fate if there was anything she could possibly do. Please, my lady, come down from the walls. If an archer sees you, the city's governor trailed off, and Elaine ignored him. Their movement out at the edge of the forest. She embraced Sedar and spun air, fire and water, watching in satisfaction as lightning struck several times. Matt would be fine, and so would Eringil, but she was not going to leave the town without him. The present-day Siwan resisted the urge to ask the young man in the black coat to repeat himself. Thank you, Jahar. We will discuss what you have told us and provide an answer for you shortly. Elia, please could you see that Jahar is provided with refreshments and somewhere comfortable to wait? She paused until he had been led out of the room and wove a ward against eavesdropping before turning her attention to the sitters. So, comments. Lelaine was the first to her feet. Mother, we cannot be seen to be supplicants to the hall. They have already humiliated us with their treatment of fellow Aes Sedai, and now they offer us gifts that are already ours. We must act, not allow them to humiliate us. They will give us what is ours regardless. Why allow them to show their position with these ceremonies Taija has suggested? Romanda followed straight after. While I share Lelaine's distaste for the hall, we must see the world as it is. We are being offered something we could not have recovered by ourselves. We must be conscious of our image and the perception of the tower, but to be offered the oath rod and the tower itself, how can we refuse her offer? If we throw it back in her face, Taija may still let us have it, but we will be making an unnecessary enemy, one that is clearly even more powerful than we had feared. The last battle is coming, and we need to cooperate until it does. She left unsaid that would no longer apply after the battle had been done. Siwan sighed and resisted the urge to pinch the bridge of her nose. Taija continued to dump problems onto her lap, all while doing impossible things in the most casual of ways. She knew she should be grateful to the woman, but it was still infuriating. Nowhere near as infuriating as some of her sitters, though. What in the light did they think the outcome would be from deliberately antagonizing Taija in the hall? They were already close to being outnumbered by them, and that was ignoring the fact that someone like Taija or Sar, tell Janin, she could not even say his old name in her head. Taija's infatuation with the man was more than problematic in itself. Regardless, any of that pair could probably kill a significant number of Aes Sedai by themselves if they put their minds to it. She was not under any illusion about how any such conflict would go. But even that was not the point. The last battle was coming. She found Taija and the hall infuriating, wrong-headed, and both an insult and a threat to the White Tower, although also a source of huge potential gains for the tower. However, all of that paled into insignificance compared to the importance of defeating the Shadow. If it was the only way to win the last battle, she would get on her knees and swear allegiance to Taija herself, even if she did it with gritted teeth. Fortunately, it was not necessary, and so that was not going to happen. However, the inability of some of her Aes Sedai to have a proper sense of priorities was beyond shameful. Any scores with the Hall could be settled after the last battle had been won, and until then they would act as allies, however reluctant her Aes Sedai might be. As the cheers in the throne room faded away, its setting much less ornate than the one she had used before Taija and Ravin had demolished her palace, Morgase raised her voice. The Lion Throne gives its gratitude to Elaine Trakand, my beloved daughter heir, and to Matrim Kothon, a loyal subject. Now I wish to speak to my daughter and Master Kothon alone. Leave us. She sighed to herself internally. Of course she would have to fate them in public, both not to undermine Elaine's own position and for the nation's morale. They had, after all, scored a great victory over Kerhian in perfidy. However, she was absolutely furious with the idiot girl. She could make gateways. Why had she not immediately returned to Keemlin or the Hall and summoned reinforcements? The fact that she had been able to hold off the Kerhian by herself was no excuse. She could not have known that she would be able to. Morgase watched courtiers and guards filing out. As for Matrim, or Matt as he styled himself, he was a problem. She had not forbidden Elaine from carrying on with him, guessing that it would just be a phase that she would grow out of, instead limiting herself to being officially unaware of it. Well, just a phase, but also Matrim's connection to the Dragon Reborn, and Perrin made things more difficult. Of course, he was nothing like her Perrin, none of his solidity or good sense. She knew what Matrim liked to get up to in his free time, carousing in taverns, although at least her eyes and ears reported that he seemed loyal to Elaine. Her first meeting with the boy had done little to reassure her. He seemed to have an odd view of courtly manners and an inability to take things seriously. Now, after this, she was going to have to change her position. He had very publicly supported both Elaine and the Crown, and it made it impossible for her to officially ignore their relationship. She would also grudgingly admit that he had also done good work helping with holding Erringil. Based on the reports she had received, he had single-handedly rallied and unified a force of disparate troops, and then led them on an expert campaign against far superior Kerhian forces that might have cut off and overwhelmed Erringil. Where had he even learned those kind of skills? Of course, none of that would have been necessary if her fool daughter had not refused to return to Keemlin for reinforcements. As the last of the courtiers filed out, she turned her gaze on Elaine. What in the light were you thinking? Elaine's self-satisfied look vanished. Why did you not go for reinforcements? Has your brain been addled by the sight of a well-turned calf and a cheeky grin? I knew what I was doing, mother. Elaine scowled defiantly at her. If I had left then, there would have been nobody to hold the town together, and I could handle the invasion force. Really? I heard that they nearly breached the walls on 2 occasions, and that if Matrim had not been disrupting their attempts at flanking the town, they would have overwhelmed its defenses. Before Elaine could argue, she continued. Regardless, what would have stopped you from delivering a message to me and immediately returning, or from sending a messenger while you stayed? Instead, you risked yourself. House Traken's line. Why did Elaine wince at that? And Erringil itself for what? A romantic dream. Your own pride. Politics dictates that I must reward you in public, but I am very disappointed in you. Sensibly, Elaine did not reply, just staring back at her all tense defiance. She would take the time to go over things with her daughter later. This was the problem with the girl being allowed to run off without proper training. She was the future ruler of Andor, not some hero out of a story. As for you, Matrim, for once I have no complaints about your actions. In fact, I am impressed. You have served the crown well. Perhaps you can push some sense into my daughter's head since she seems to lack so much. I cannot say that I approve of you, but the two of you seem determined to ignore that, and Perrin assures me that you are a good man at heart. So I shall continue to allow it until and unless you give me reason to change my mind. Now, I think for your services to the crown, a minor lordship. Good service should be rewarded, and it might go some way towards making you a more appropriate consort for my daughter. How odd. He did not look as pleased as she might have expected. Chapter 134. I never want to see a binding rod again. Chapter text chapter C. I never want to see a binding rod again. The day after the party, Taija was sniggering to herself about the fact that Alexei hadn't turned up yet. He was normally an early riser, and she suspected she knew what he'd been up to. She'd need to think of a good way to wind him up about it. Not too much, of course. She didn't want to actually upset him, but just enough. A good life was about balance after all. Taija was broken out of her happy musings by Benny. Good morning, my dear, you're looking well. Not too much in the way of celebration to give you a sore head. Oh no, I went to bed at a reasonable hour and I don't drink to excess. Taija's mind dropped back to what might have been the worst day of her life and she batted it away. Probably wise. Benny seemed almost awkward. It was an odd thing to think about her. She was always so smoothly herself. Is something wrong? Oh well, no, not as such, but could we perhaps speak in private? A few minutes later, the two of them were in Taija's office. Wards against eavesdropping spun around it. So what did you want to talk to me about, Benny? She hesitated, actually looking nervous. Tell me, what would it take for me to become one of the Hall's Aes Sedai? Taija froze for a second. That wasn't what she'd expected to hear. Are you sure? It wasn't that it didn't make sense. Benny had basically attached herself to the Hall, sure, but why now? Was it going to piss off Siyuan? Did Taija care? Taija, dear, have you ever seen me be unsure? Well, that was a fair point. Why now, though? Oh, the binding rod. It would be that. No, that's true. Why, though? Is the whole not simply offering a better way of life that anyone sensible would wish to join? Taija sighed just a little and raised her eyebrows. I do believe you used to be sweeter before someone put you in charge of this place. Very well. Benny smiled. Taija could have sworn there was a hint of satisfaction behind Benny's words, although Light knew why. I genuinely do think that the Hall offers a better vision for the future. I said I have become too distant, aloof. However, I think that you would also benefit from a certain amount of tempering to ensure that you are not taken advantage of. Also, I have no wish to die of old age in the next few years, and would like to unswear the oaths that I have taken on the oath rod. And there Taija had it, although the rest must be true as well. Benny was still bound after all. Taija thought fast. You're welcome in the hall, of course, but you'd have to pass the tests to be Aes Sedai in the same way as any other person. Would that be problematic? Morally, no. The channeling, I think you would need some practice, Taija grimaced. Your spinning is a little bit crude, but I'd be happy to help you with that. It was always a pleasure to spend time with Benny. As for the oaths, I don't really care. You know how I feel about people binding themselves, so I'd be happy to help you with that even if you don't want to sign up, but you do realize it might get you in trouble with the Tower, Aes Sedai. Benny smiled. I never acknowledged Siwan as the Amulin, and Aleda is certainly no longer worthy of the title. I think I shall manage. You'd have to be an aspirant until your channeling was up to scratch. Taija needed to keep the Hall's integrity, not just hand out titles to friends. Benny knelt. It had been quite a while since she did that for anybody, especially with her rather aged knees. Even the Amulin only required Aes Sedai to kiss her ring. Still, today was a day of firsts. She wore the formal, unadorned black coat of the Hall, like the crowd of initiates behind her. She would have thought that Taija was deliberately making a political statement of this, except that she knew this was what was done for every raising of an initiate. There was none of the secrecy that characterized the White Tower's ceremonies. Taija, Tel, and Egwene stood in front of her in their own black coats. Behind them hung the gigantic banner of the Hall, the banner of the ancient Aes Sedai, sinuously divided circle looming on its red background. Benny could not help but glance up to it. So strange to think that she was here, swearing herself to a resurrected organization that had died millennia ago, kneeling before an almost forgotten symbol. I swear to follow the ideals of the Hall of Servants, now and forever. I shall conduct myself as a servant of all. I shall help those that are in need. I shall inflict no cruelty on others, and I shall always remember my role is to make the world a better place. At least she could speak the old tongue well enough. She would, of course, soon be able to break this oath whenever she wanted, but she doubted she would. It was a good oath. Taija stepped forward and pulled a red patch from her pocket, the flame of Tar Valon at its center. Rise Benny Nalsad, Aes Sedai of the White Tower. It floated over to her on invisible flows of Sedar. We welcome you as an aspirant to the Hall of Servants. You have completed the first step on the road to becoming true Aes Sedai. Stand. Oh, that was a spicy extra word Taija had added to the ceremony. How many of the initiates would speak the old tongue well enough to pick up on that? Presumably some. Benny felt a slight pressure, and the patch was there, stuck onto the left breast of her long black coat. She stood and Tell and Nynaeve Sedai both came forward and clasped her hands in theirs. Welcome. Finally, Taija came forward, but instead of taking her hands, she enveloped her in a hug. Welcome, Benny. Welcome. Excellent. She was still Aes Sedai. That was why Taija had decided on the altered patch of an aspirant, but now she would be treated as a student in the hall rather than an honored guest and teacher. The demotion was less than ideal, but the hall was hardly an onerous place to be a student, and it was for a worthwhile goal. Another aspirant stepped forward and clasped her hands, speaking words of welcome. Now she just needed to get through this, and then Taija had said to come to her rooms and they could deal with the 3 oaths. As Benny headed off, newly released from her oaths, Taija looked over at Tell. He was staring at the binding rod again, like he had when Aleda first pulled it out. She gave him a poke. What's up? He didn't answer for a second. I was thinking about something you said to me before we... Oh. Taija was suddenly feeling a bit tense. Instead of replying, he suddenly picked the binding rod up. Taija couldn't feel it, but she still somehow just knew he was channeling into it. What the fuck was he doing? I swear I will never betray the light. What are you doing? She couldn't keep the panic out of your voice. Tell ignored her and just continued speaking. I swear I will never do anything to hurt Taija Kosola. He put the rod down again and met her eyes. I know you still have nightmares about me. You wake up terrified of me. I've hurt you so much, I could never hurt you again. No, you. She was too angry, upset, overwrought to speak coherently. You can't do that, no. The idea was repulsive, disgusting. It's done. He folded his arms across his chest. You fucking idiot, Tell. I don't want that. I don't want this. Either you're forgiven or you're not. I'm not going to sit here and watch you bind yourself. No, you're the only person I have left. I'm not watching you do this to yourself. I won't. Taija's vision was blurred, and she could feel tears on her cheeks. She wished she'd just dropped the fucking rod out of a gateway outside Siwin's village. He didn't reply, just looked mulish. Taija's temper snapped. She couldn't stand the thought of him with that smooth, bound face, of him cutting his life short like that, dying young, just because of some misguided desire to know. In a rage, Taija channeled, shielding him and snatching the rod into the air, spirit already flowing into it. Unswear it. Now. Just until after the last battle, he made the offer tentatively. She stepped forward, right into his personal space, looking up at him through streaming eyes. Fucking unswear it. Don't do this to me. I don't want to see you get old and die. I don't want you bound, and I really don't want a slave telling himself it's for me. I know what you did, and light help me, I still trust you. I still want you, but I can't take this. Take this fucking thing, unswear on it, and never try anything this fucking stupid again. Tell was blanching, retreating from her furious expression until his back hit the wall. I didn't think you'd. No, you fucking didn't think, did you? Unswear. The oaths. After a moment he reached out and touches the rod. I unswear all oaths that bind me. As the rod released its hold on him, he gasped and shuddered. Taija didn't feel at all sympathetic. Right. She struggled to get her temper under control, communication, not lashing out. I understand that you thought you were making a nice gesture, but I'm really angry with you right now. I'm going to go and calm down. We can talk more this evening. Just don't do something like that again, please. Taija spun on her heel and stormed out. Verin smiled at Cadsuane over her cup of tea. It really has been fascinating staying in the hall, although I must confess to occasional frustrations. Sometimes they can be singularly unhelpful. Still, the opportunities for learning about the Age of Legends. Indeed. Were her eyelids drooping yet? They have certainly been making waves. Now this latest development is yet more impressive. Siwin will no doubt be delighted by what she is being offered. Verin took another sip of tea. Yes, Cadsuane's eyelids were certainly drooping. Well, of course, who would not be delighted? The importance to the tower cannot be understated, and it is exciting that we shall soon be able to return to our proper homes. As she prattled on, she watched Cadsuane gradually slump in her seat. It was always satisfying to see a plan come together. Soon, the older Aes Sedai was snoring away on Verin's bed. After a moment's thought, she used a funnel or air to put some more of the special tea down Cadsuane's throat. It would keep her asleep for some hours. If all went well, She would be back to deny everything before Cadsuane woke. If things did not go well, in that case, she would likely have bigger problems than an angry Cadsuane. Verin carefully reached out and started to extract Cadsuane's web of ornaments from her hair, ready to move it to her own head. One of these would be the one she needed, the one that unraveled any weave it encountered. Taija jolted awake in her bed with the sound of an alarm ringing in her head. The one that told her someone successfully unraveled her more obvious wards. After a moment of thought, she poked Tell. Sorry to wake you, but someone's trying to get to the binding rod. He went from bleary to wide awake in a second. Taija was glad she'd sat down and talked with him that evening. It was never good to go to sleep on an argument, even if she was still annoyed with him for his stunt with the binding rod. Also, whatever stupid things he thought she felt, she still slept better with him there beside her. In no time at all, the two of them had almost silently exited Taija's bedroom and crept over to the nearby room she'd left the binding rod in. Tell held up 3 fingers and Taija nodded. Then he counted them down. 2, 1, go. With the power, Taija blew the door open and spun Sedar into a blinding flash and crash of noise. At the same time, Tell dived through the doorway, going into a roll, while she stood ready to annihilate anyone or anything through the doorway. Taija was almost surprised when the only person in there was Verin, looking around utterly disoriented with the binding rod in her hand. Taija didn't hesitate, slamming a shield between her, and Sedar only to see it unravel, just like with Cadsuane. Speaking of Cadsuane, were those her ornaments in Verin's hair? The momentary surprise didn't slow her down. Taija was already spinning. Air ripped several chunks of wood from the door with a crashing, splintering sound, and she pulled them round herself dramatically. Verin just about managed to focus on her, her eyes starting to widen when Tell crashed into her from the side. He wasn't holding back. Verin hit the ground with a thump, probably only saved from broken bones by the turangreal in her hair. Tell was already forcing her face down, making sure she couldn't see anything other than the floor. Then he was pulling the ornaments out of her hair and passing them back to Taija. As soon as they left Verin, Taija pushed a shield into place and bound her in air to hold her down. With that, both of them relaxed slightly, and Tell climbed off Verin, brushing himself down. Taija took a second to study the net of ornaments. What she could do with something like that. The temptation to say Verin lost them was almost overwhelming, but no, that wasn't who she wanted to be. Cadsuane served the light in her own somewhat obnoxious way. Taija even got on reasonably well with her by that point, and she wasn't a thief. Not unless they really deserved it anyway. Tell, please could you go and wake Nynaeve, and then check Verin's rooms? I think Cadsuane was visiting her, so she might well be there. If she's not, we'll have to get some more answers out of Verin. If you find her, get Nynaeve to look after her, and then we can have a chat with Verin together. Tell hurried off, and Taija thought about whether to get Verin into a more comfortable position. After a moment, she decided that since she hadn't been allowed to have a good night's sleep, Verin could put up with some discomfort until Tell got back. As she waited for Tell to return, she played around with some webs she'd been thinking about. Since the cleansing of the taint, she'd had so little time to think about proper research, and there were ideas that had been jostling for attention in her head. Taija wasn't sure how long it was before Tell returned, but when he did, he looked a bit grim. Cadsuane was in Verin's room, unharmed luckily, just fast asleep. Nynaeve thinks she was drugged and has healed her. Hopefully she'll be awake soon and she'll be keeping an eye on her. Well, at least she's not hurt. Taija hauled Verin to her feet with air. So, Verin, care to explain yourself? She looked surprisingly unflustered given her circumstances. Do you always speak the old tongue with each other? How fascinating. Taija sighed to herself. Enough with the games, please. Based on your actions, I'm struggling to conclude anything other than that you're Black Adger, and if you can't convince me you're not, then believe me you won't enjoy the consequences. An understandable conclusion for you to draw. Allow me to explain. Verin paused. Actually, if I am going to explain, then I will need access to the oath rod. Taija raised her eyebrows, but released one of Verin's hands and placed the binding rod there with air before spinning uninverted spirit into it. Go ahead. Thank you. Verin hesitated. Was that a look of satisfaction on her face? It seemed inappropriate given her situation. I unswear all oaths that bind me. The pain must have been agonizing based on the way she screamed, yet she still looked pleased when it had passed. I swear to speak no word that is not true. All right, so are you Black Adger? Oh yes, I am indeed. Taija's jaw dropped. Verin seemed to enjoy the silence that her slightly smug statement created because she paused before continuing. But there is a certain amount of context that I feel you would find helpful. Taija was still slightly stunned after her conversation with Verin. She'd left her with Tell, not quite a prisoner, not quite a guest. She needed to decide what to do with her and what she'd just told her. Taija also needed to move fast. The Black Adger in Siwan's village were going to be getting ready to either strike or flee before the binding rod was handed over to her. Before she did that, though, she should check on Cadswain. It didn't take her long to get to Verin's room, where she found Cadswain sitting in bed looking thunderous while Nynaeve loomed over her. Knowing Nynaeve, Cadswain had already tried to get out of bed and been told she needed to rest. When Taija came in, Cadswain looked up at her. Taija. Tell Nynaeve she's to let me up immediately. Taija glanced at Nynaeve. I'm not sure I dare to do that. Anyway, you'll be pleased to know we've apprehended Verin. She hasn't gotten away with your Turangreel. Well then, where are they? Cadswain gave Taija a suspicious look that Taija felt was rather unfair, but the older woman was a bit out of sorts. Taija couldn't imagine people managed to drug her very often. Here, Taija gave her a cheery smile. I got them back for you. She held them out and could see Cadswain nearly snatched at them, but then restrained herself and moved with more dignity. Thank you, she hesitated. I appreciate it. Chapter 135. Interlude Roman 33. A quick look at the Forsaken. Chapter text Interlude Roman 33. A quick look at the Forsaken. The competent Forsaken duo, Demandred and Semirage, both wore black as a matter of course. But he suspected that if that had not been the case, then for this meeting in the unseen world, they would have worn it anyway. So, Messana. Semirage sounded as glum as he had ever heard her. Yes, it seems that Taija Kosola and Samil, although I should really call him Tel Janin now, got her. Them and the others they brought forward from our time. Semirage sounded almost defiant. I still think you are being paranoid there. It was a bluff. You say that, Messana said that, but now Messana is dead. You do make a point. Demandred sighed to himself. He was not a man who was prone to fondness or emotion, but he had liked Messana as much as he had liked any of the Chosen. He could not say he would miss her. She was competition after all, but things somehow still seemed less without her. Do you know how she died? I believe so. I visited the White Tower when I learnt of her death. It had a hole drilled through it, and the Black Adger believed she was the target. From talking to some of this time's so-called Aes Sedai, it seems that the tower was attacked by Luz Thurin and probably Taija Kosola, and they were surprised Messana did not smash them with the sangreal she had. Ah, their eyes met. They could both work out what had happened, but he said it out loud to be sure. So she lit herself up with a sangreal until Janin had placed a team with Kalendor on the nearby mountain. That would be my guess, Semirage nodded. Well, that is why you do not send someone with no military experience against a professional. She had many skills, but she was not a fighter. And her sangreal, Semirage shrugged. Gone, unfortunately. He was not totally sure he believed that he would need to watch her more carefully. Demandred hesitated. What did you do with the half-drained children left in the tower? Oh, I gathered them up. They will be useful, and leaving them in the tower is just asking for this new hall to destroy them at their leisure. Messana hardly needs them any more after all. Sensible. Now, do we retaliate against their so-called hall? Semirage immediately shook her head. They will be expecting it, and they will have defenses. I have no doubt that you can bring a substantial amount of firepower to bear, but I also learnt that they emptied the Angreal and Sangreal stores at the tower. Do you have the resources to beat multiple female Sangreal and Kalendor? Allies, as they were, he was not going to give her any more information than she needed on his resources. A tough nut to crack, certainly. Neither of us is prone to sentimentality. Messana's foolishness was her own. We will not take any unnecessary risks, and I think a direct attack would be too much of a risk. I do, however, have one asset in the hall. There are two truly indispensable people in the hall. Perhaps it is time to give Tame some new orders. Death and spiders, Moradin sat back in his chair, steepling his fingers, soft flowing across his eyes. Everything was happening as he intended. Soon he would be able to end the pattern. He just needed to ensure that young Thor made the right choice when it came to it. The boy would need to be just broken enough. Mercedian sighed to herself as the initiate of the hall eagerly told her about the latest gossip. Apparently, Taija Kosola and Tel Janin had resumed their relationship, as if that had not happened long ago. Sometimes she was not sure what was even the point of speaking to some of these dark friends. Knowledge was power, but in some cases only barely. Love and pleasure Lanfear, although she was not allowed to call herself that anymore, stalked through the unseen world, hunting. Luz had betrayed her, Taija was out of her reach, Teljanin had cheated his way into victory. It simply was not fair. She would show them all. She had gone to speak to Ajna, or Arsengar as he was now known, with some ideas, and he had practically laughed her out of the hole that he called his laboratory. She was the greatest scientist alive, whatever he said. Mercedian had been easy enough to bribe for the location of this so-called Hall of Servants, yet everywhere she went dreams were warded. She knew some of these dreams must belong to Taija's new initiates, but warded, every single one was warded. She had tried to follow some of Taija's new Aes Sedai, but again their dreams were warded. She had even remembered the boys that had been with young Luz before he declared himself. The big, bearded one's dreams were different. She could access them, but some instinct told her it would be the kind of mistake she would only make once. The other one warded. Again, no doubt another thing to lay at Taija's sanctimonious little feet. Where had it all gone wrong? She had had love with Luz. Taija had been her friend. A slightly irritating young friend, like a poorly trained puppy, but nevertheless someone she was genuinely fond of. Then they had betrayed her, like everybody else. Luz she might give another chance to, if he begged her. She did believe in love after all. The rest of them she would leave screaming for the mercy of death. She certainly would not be repeating her mistake of letting Taija go. Lanfear did not often make mistakes, but truly that had been one. Oh, the misery it had caused Taija had been utterly delicious. But in a flash, the fucking woman seemed to have somehow reseduced Tel Janin and turned him back into a weakling of a sanctimonious prick. He honestly could not even work out what the man saw in her. He had been a world-famous professional athlete who could have almost anyone he wanted, one of the strongest of the chosen. Then he went for Taija, an overly earnest, mousy-looking academic. Madness. If she did not know that Taija was far too much of a goody-two-shoes for it, she would think the girl had compelled him. With a growl she stepped out of the unseen world. She would just have to continue to work against them until Luz saw the truth. Just vibing, Greendale lay back in her bath and smiled to herself. Everything was going simply perfectly. She had much of the West sewn up and eating out of her hands. Her collection of pets was growing apace, and another of the competition had just died. With trembling hands, young Lena scraped a pumice stone along her bare arm. She truly was enjoyable. Greendale had considered erasing her mind, as she almost always did with her pets, but she felt she owed the former leash holder a special experience. So she, alone among them, was allowed to remember, allowed to know what was happening to her. Then, sometimes, not every day, but just intermittently enough to keep her wondering, Greendale would remove something from her mind. A memory, a sensation, it did not matter what. What mattered was that she knew what she had lost, and that at any moment Greendale might choose to take more, that one day in the distant future she would be just like any of Greendale's other pets, joyously and unknowingly serving her. Simping for science, Arsengar spun spirit, water and earth into the construct he had been making, watching it twitch awkwardly in front of him. No, that was not quite right. He would need to adapt the web a bit, but he'd get this. His mind went back to Lanfear's visit to him. He didn't know what happened to the woman. She had had such a talent before the bore, but then she had allowed one failure to destroy her love for science. It had been bad for her career, of course, but her complete abdication of any interest in pushing the bounds of human knowledge was an embarrassment. When she'd come to him yesterday wanting to collaborate, it hadn't been a difficult decision to send her on her way. The woman was not interested in furthering human knowledge. She was only interested in bringing down her perceived rival, as if there was any equivalence between her and Taija Kosola. Ironic that she had said he was obsessed with the woman, when Lanfear was the one who seemed to be centering her life around bringing her down. Chapter 136, An Unpleasant Awakening. Chapter text, Chapter CI, An An unpleasant awakening with Cadsuane's possessions returned to her. Taija headed back to tell who was guarding Verin. We can decide what to do with her later. Just keep an eye on her. She really wasn't sure what to do with an apparent defector from the Black Adger. She supposed with the binding rod it had been easy enough to establish her honesty. Punishing her for what she did to infiltrate them would be the height of hypocrisy. It wasn't something Taija would even seriously consider, but Verin was probably at some risk now. Revenge attacks from dark friends, possibly angry Tower Sedai, something to think about. I need to go and speak to Siyun. What, by yourself? What if they— Yes. Taija's voice was firm. By myself. I'll need to move fast and only speak to her. I want to actually get this lot, not have them slip away because they got some warning. So you're just going to waltz in through all of their defenses? There was no need for him to sound so skeptical. Yep, that's the plan. Tell just sighed. He should definitely have more confidence in her abilities. It'll be fine, Tell. If I do get caught, you can come and be manly and rescue me. He sighed again, a put-upon look on his face. Fine. Taija huffed to herself and turned to leave. There'd be no need for rescues, obviously. It was a hot night, one of a very long stretch. Taija was sure it should have been well into autumn by then. It couldn't be natural. Taija found herself making her way towards Siyun's village, inverted tendrils of spirit spread ahead of her to check for any unexpected wards. She'd spun a couple of extra webs over herself, one of illusion that was a kind of discount invisibility. It didn't actually make her invisible, especially if she was moving, but it made her blend in with the background in an impossible way, turning her into a vaguely visible blur. Another dampened any sound she made. The rest was all her own skill. She wasn't an elite scout, but she could be pretty quiet when she wanted to be. Misspent years trying to sneak up on Tell maybe. It was surprisingly easy to pick her way through the woods to Siyun's village. As soon as she reached the edge, Taija spun Sedar, and her appearance rippled, its blur replaced with that of an elderly serving lady carrying a bundle of clothing. The streets were almost empty due to the late hour, and anyway, no one really looked at servants. From there, it was easy enough to find the house she knew Siyun lived in. Obviously, it would be warded, and it was also guarded properly. A pair of soldiers stood at the door, and Taija would have been surprised if there weren't more patrolling around. There'd be no ducking her head and just walking in there. However, Siyun's house had a small, walled-off garden at the back. When no one was around, Taija ducked into the dark gap between two buildings, respinning the light distortion web around herself, and made her way there. Another quick web made steps of air, and she climbed them to carefully poke her head just over the wall. There was no one in the garden, but there was a simple ward that would go off if a human crossed the wall. Visible to Taija, and to any other woman who could channel, she could trace its workings easily enough. The key thing was it was tied off. That meant no live feedback. Easy. Taija couldn't imagine Siyun would be having Aes Sedai holding live wards all night. That would have been beyond paranoid. Still, there was no point underestimating these people. She felt out with probes of inverted spirit, and yes, there. A smaller inverted ward that she was fairly sure would trigger if there were any changes to the visible ward. Clever. If she'd just bent her way through the first ward, she'd probably have triggered that one. Still, easy enough to deal with. After a little more checking for more wards, Taija felt her way around the inverted ward's connections to the visible one. A real master could probably replace the inputs. She wasn't that, so instead she decided to just unravel the inverted ward. A deft bit of work, and it came undone in a fading mist of flows. This was far easier than the White Tower, as she'd expected. The Aes Sedai would have had centuries to refine their wards there, and it was pretty obvious they'd been added to by one of the Forsaken, presumably the now dead one. With the inverted ward gone, and the anti-intruder ward both relatively simple and uninverted, it was easy enough to keep it stable while opening a hole in it for her to climb through. Taija dropped to the ground inside the garden and hesitated, looking around her for any reaction to the faint noise. When nothing happened, she smiled to herself and made her way closer. Windows were open due to the unseasonal heat, and she could hear movement inside. Presumably, they were confident that the wards around the garden and the guards would keep anyone from getting inside. She reached up to climb through a window, and then her instincts screamed, pulling her attention behind her. Taija dived under a blow and spun air, wrapping a guard in it as fast as thought. After a moment to allow her frantic heartbeat to slow and her hands to stop trembling, she reached up and hauled herself through the window. As Taija slid into the room, she heard a cough outside it and froze. Nothing more happened, but that had told her enough. She was going to have to deal with at least one more guard. Oh well. Taija crept up to the door and grasped the handle with Sedar, other webs poised for completion. A deep breath, and then she pulled it open. 2 guards. Before they could do more than start to turn, Shed already spun a ward against eavesdropping around them, and then air to bind them. They didn't have time to make any noise, even if anyone could have heard through her ward, before she dragged the back into the reception room. Terrified eyes stared at her from frozen bodies, and she mouthed an apology, although really there wasn't much point, as all they'd see was a shapeless blur. Taija quickly pulled the other guard in through the window too. Another web and they were all asleep. It was probably kinder to them. Taija tied off the webs around them so that they'd dissolve in about 2 hours, and then put them in a corner with an illusion over them so they wouldn't be found without a proper search. Then it was time for Siyun's room, assuming there weren't any other guards. Taija glided out of the reception room, shutting the door behind her, and headed up the stairs, her appearance rippling again to be replaced by Angier's. The question was, which one would be Siyun's bedroom? Fortunately, it wasn't too difficult to work out. Only one room glowed with wards. There was also only one room with an Aes Sedai sitting sleepily outside it. Oops. Taija's assessment of Siyun's paranoia went up a notch. She didn't recognize the Aes Sedai, but it didn't really matter. Taija had her shielded and bound in air before she could even realize what was happening. Taija supposed she could store the woman in Siyun's room while they talked. With that, she sat down and started to study Siyun's wards. Reflecting the fact that people needed to be going in and out of her room all the time, they weren't overly complicated, and Taija didn't think there was anything lethal in there. There were some tricky mixtures of inverted webs among the visible ones, but all in all not overly difficult. Really, what she'd normally do was just rip the wards down, ignore the alarms, kill everyone inside, and then run away, but that was hardly appropriate here. She was trying to be helpful, so she sat down and started picking away at the wards. After a few minutes, Taija was getting frustrated. She could bring them down, no question, but she was struggling to get through them or unravel them without setting off alarms, which isn't what she wanted. Another few minutes and Taija was going from frustrated to just bored and irritated. Perhaps instead if she just cut the wards off from any outside warning. It didn't matter so much if Siyun knew she was coming in. It was slightly less dramatic than having her wake up with Taija sitting on her bed, but then that might be a bit much anyway. Tell had once told her that when she got over enthusiastic about things, she could come off a bit serial killer. She'd sulked for the rest of the day, but to be fair, he'd had a point. Hiding under Nadiel's bed for over 5 hours had been a bit excessive. Fine. It was easy enough to follow the bits of the 2 wards that went away from Siyun's room. Those Taija smoothly unraveled. They were pretty simple. For the rest, she started by spinning her own larger ward against eavesdropping, laying it just outside Siyun's wards. With that done, Taija drew fully on her angriel, readied a web of air, and then reached out with spirit. She crushed the wards and yanked open the door at the same time. A quick step, and she was through, pulling the shielded Aes Sedai guard behind her, even as bells sounded in Siyun's bedroom. Taija was already spinning Sedar, shielding Siyun and tying her up in air. A bit of probing with spirit, and a couple of seconds later she was able to stop the bells too. Taija quickly shut the door behind her, leaving her faced with an utterly furious-looking Siyun frozen in her bed. Taija took a moment to spin a couple more webs around the other Aes Sedai to make sure she couldn't hear or speak, making them visible for once so Siyun knew what she was doing. Siyun, I'm really sorry, but we need to talk, and I couldn't let anyone else know I was here. Siyun's eyes bulged wider, and Taija realized she'd better release her. Then she also realized she was still under her web of illusion. Oops, she untied it. It's me, Taija. She added the last part, even though it probably wasn't necessary. Siyun knew what she looked like. I'm going to let you go now. I just didn't want you to lash out at me. With those words, Taija released the air and shield, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach that was saying she might have been over-enthusiastic in the way she'd done this. What in the light do you? Siyun quivered as she brought herself back under control. When she spoke again, her voice is flat. I take it that this is important. Even you would not be mad enough to do something like this if it was not. So fine, I shall pull my nets in. Tell me and then I will decide whether you are leaving here alive or not. She must really be angry if she was threatening Taija's life. Not that she was in any position to follow through, but Taija would let her have that one. She'd have been just as furious if someone did this to her. I really am sorry, Siyuan. It was absolutely vital that I got you this information as soon as possible, and that no one knew I was speaking to you. I couldn't think of any other way that wouldn't set things off early. Siyuan looked skeptical, so Taija hurriedly continued. It's about the Black Adger. Siyuan's irritation faded, replaced by worry, but her voice is still flat. I do not see why that makes it so important to pretend to make an assassination attempt on me. That wasn't what she'd done. Although from Siyuan's perspective, anyway. What's important is that I've managed to get a list of Black Adger sisters, over 200 of them, although most of them are dead or not with you. Siyuan's eyes widened. And you were worried that with the Oath Rod coming back they would either flee or attack. Of course, that would create the urgency. She sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. Fine, you had a good reason to be here. I accept that, just can you please not do that again? Taija nodded. If it helps, I really am sorry. It was just necessary. Here's the list. She fumbled in a pocket and pulled out the hastily copied list of names. Thank you. Siyuan took it and channeled a ball of light into the air before starting to read through it. Her eyes widening in places, she punctuated her study with occasional curses. When she looked up, there was grim determination on her face. Well, most of these people are gone already, but some of them are about to have an even more unpleasant awakening than I had. That made Taija smile, slightly guiltily. There might be others, of course, but there are so many on that list that it's hard to believe. Also, you'll have the binding rod to check. Yes, I will indeed. Thank you. The words actually sounded heartfelt. It's nothing. We both serve the light. Do you want any help with the Black Sisters? Siyuan paused and then shook her head. No, thank you. The White Tower will clean up its own mess in this case. Would you be able to leave as discreetly as you came? It shouldn't be too difficult, especially if I can just walk out of the building disguised as a servant or guard. Taija thought for a second. You'll need to say something to the sister here, obviously, but there are also 3 guards asleep in the reception room with a big candlestick on the table. Siyuan gave her a deeply unimpressed look. Thank you. One more thing, if you have a second. She didn't deny it, so Taija continued. I also have Elada in captivity. You have what? Elada. When we raided the tower, she ended up coming back with Rand. Siyuan sighed. I take it you will be insisting on stilling or executing her. I suppose it is not the end of the world, since that is the sentence you would face here too. About that, not quite. We've tested her with the binding rod. She's an idiot, there's no question about that, but she honestly believed she was doing the right thing. She did order Rand's kidnapping, but not the rest, so while we have a claim on her, it ultimately doesn't have the driving force that it did for the others. We'd probably just send her to join Tirana for a few years. Given that, if you want her, she's yours. The only condition is that I'd want her to swear an oath not to attack me, Rand, or the Hall. You do realize that under Tower law the penalty for falsely claiming to be the Amulin is stilling. Taija grimaced. I can't believe I'm saying this, but this might be a time to think about whether you can see a way round that. Honestly, the woman was a fucking idiot, but I can actually see why she thought you were a dark friend and needed to be removed. She's a strongish channeler. Taija ignored Siyuan's scowl at that, and has actually realized her errors. It seems a waste to get rid of someone who'll fight for the light, and her publicly supporting you might go some way to reuniting the White Tower. And what about Lean, Ulrich? Have you forgotten them? The vehemence in Siyuan's voice surprised Taija. She was normally far more composed. Of course I haven't. I liked Lean. Frankly, I liked her better than you, and I know Ulrich mattered to you. However, Elada confirmed they died in the fighting. She didn't order their deaths. Did that make it different? Taija threw her hands up in the air. Whatever, I don't really care what you do with her. If you do sever her, I won't shed a tear. She's done more damage to the forces of the light than half the Forsaken. I just wanted to put the idea out there since it might be good for the light. Regardless of what you decide, you'll get her along with the binding rod. Fine, fine. I am sorry. I should not have allowed myself to become emotional. I understand what you are saying, and I will think on it. No, it's all right. I understand too. There were people you were close to. I'm not sure she'd have survived coming back to the hall if it had been my friends. Like I said, she's all yours. Take political advantage or leave her body for the crows. Thank you. You have done a great service for the White Tower. I will not forget it. That seemed to be a dismissal, so Taija gave Siwan a polite bow. I'll see you in a couple of days. Now to find her way out again. Chapter 137. The Wrath of Siwan. Chapter text Chapter Sai. The Wrath of Siwan. A couple of days later it was time for the second official meeting of the first among servants and the Amielin seat. Taija couldn't say she particularly liked having her title. It wasn't very her. She wouldn't have to put up with it forever, though, just until she could find someone else to take it on and leave her to enjoy life more. Maybe Egwene. This time she went to Siwan, taking an entourage with her. Apparently going alone was a sign of weakness, or possibly made her vulnerable. Either way she wasn't allowed. Not for official visits anyway. Rand was busy sorting out Kerhian. Apparently he was thinking of making Elaine queen of it, although Taija suspect that she'd rather he didn't, so that would be interesting to watch. She did have Tell, Alexei, and Nynaeve, along with a small crowd of aspirants as her escorts, plus some of the dedicated from the hall. She also had Elada, shielded by an aspirant, but allowed to walk unbound in the middle of them. Taija had been a bit surprised Elada was so blasé about it when she told her she'd be handing her over to Siwan. Elada must have known Tower law and the likely consequences, but she just said that if that was what was needed to heal the Tower, then so be it. She also hadn't hesitated in giving her oath that she wouldn't attack Taija, Rand, or the Hall. Of course, with Taija handing the binding rod over to Siwan, there was nothing stopping them from having her unswear the oath. But by that point, Taija didn't have the mental energy to add that to her list of worries. When Taija emerged from the gateway, she was greeted by a crowd of Tower Aes Sedai, novices and warders. Siwan's keeper, Megan, welcomed her with a shallow curtsy. The White Tower welcomes the first among servants, our ally under the light. Taija gave her an even shallower bow in response. After all, Siwan was her peer there, not the keeper. Thank you. It is a pleasure to be here among our allies and friends of the White Tower. Taija was soon escorted to the pavilion Siwan had set up for the occasion. As she walked, one thing that struck her from the crowd was that Siwan certainly seemed to be increasing the number of novices she had. There must have been close to 100 of them, including maybe 10 men also dressed in white. Nothing like the hall's rapidly growing numbers, but still impressive compared to what the White Tower used to have. Siwan received Taija sat on an ornate chair, more of a throne, putting the Amielin onto the seat. Heh! However, when Taija arrived, Siwan stood to greet her. There was no curtsy there, of course. Modern people saw a curtsy as a sign of submission, another sign of why curtsies were inferior to bows. A carefully calibrated bow could be anything from polite greeting to a social inferior, all the way to abject submission. Regardless of Siwan's own lack of curtsy or bow, Taija gave her a bow of her own when she stopped in front of her, one appropriate for an equal in a professional context. The White Tower welcomes the first among servants. Welcome, Taija. It is my pleasure to see you here when you bring such good news for the White Tower. Thank you, Siwan. The pleasure is all mine. To be able to serve the light at your side as the last battle approaches is an honor. Time for a bit of drama. You of course know of the great victory that the Hall of Servants struck against the Shadow only a week ago. The death of one of the Forsaken and the weakening of the Black Adger. Taija saw some eyes tighten at that. During that battle, we were also fortunate enough to obtain two things that we knew would be of great interest to our friends and allies in the White Tower. She gestured grandly behind her, and Alexei floated an ornately carved box forward. We were able to capture the White Tower's oath rod. Taija was careful to use their term. And now I return it to you as one friend to another. Siwan already knew about its effect on Aes Sedai lifespans, but Taija had the feeling she might not have told any of the others about it. Taija had already made sure to slip that fact into conversation with Moiraine and Cadsuane, and the others had been given a nudge to mention it to any Tower Aes Sedai they could, as long as they could do it without being too clumsy. Her conscience wouldn't allow her to have those people keep on subjecting themselves to binding without fully understanding the consequences, but Taija's meaner side also thought that it would be very helpful for undermining the attractiveness of the White Tower if people knew they were having their lifespans by becoming Aes Sedai under it. The box landed on a stand that Siwin had placed there, and one of her sitters came forward and opened it before holding up the binding rod. Siwin's stern visage faded to be replaced with a smile just for a second. When the binding rod was replaced in its box, Taija continued. Second is Elada du Avrani Rohan. Rand Sedai, always good to remind them he was aligned with her, was able to bring her to us from the White Tower. While she has committed crimes against the Hall of Servants, I recognize that the White Tower has the greater claim on her. As such, I give her to you without preconditions or demands. She is yours to do with as you wish. Taija stepped slightly to the side, and Elada walked proudly forward. Taija had told her what would be happening and had even given her some advice. She was far too nice, really. Whether Elada would follow it or not, Taija didn't know. Whether it would even be enough to save her or not, she didn't know either, nor did she care overly. She made a small effort to help Elada, and that was more than enough. Elada stepped in front of her, meeting Siwin's eyes, chin held high. For a moment, Taija thought she was about to commit suicide by arrogance, and then she sank to her knees, bowing her head. Mother, I am sorry. In my arrogance, I have led the White Tower to the greatest disaster in its existence. I had what I believed to be good reasons at the time, but it has become clear to me that I was wrong. You are the rightful Amulin, and I will acknowledge that in any way you command. I beg for mercy. The last battle is coming, and I wish to live to fight for the light in it, but I will accept any punishment you see fit to give me. Siwin studied her for a long moment, disgust on her face. We shall discuss your fate later. Take her away. A pair of warders came and took Elada's arms before hustling her away, not particularly gently. Meh. Once Elada had been removed, Siwin turned back to Taija. Thank you, Taija. The White Tower does not forget its friends. You have done us a great service. She scanned across the crowd of Aes Sedai. Taija also delivered me a secret message earlier. It seems that she has been able to identify the remaining members of the Black Adger, or so she believes. Bring them out. A number of Aes Sedai were prodded forward. Taija even recognized a few of them from her time in the White Tower. Given Siwin's numbers, it wasn't as many as she'd expected, perhaps 12 or so, but then Taija had already thinned out their ranks with her ploy before the cleansing of the taint. On the other side of Siwin, a burly warder dragged forward a block of wood and placed it on the grass. Sisters, you are accused of being members of the Black Adger by our ally. I would not act just on her word, for that would not be justice. But now we have the oath rod. Taija saw some of the sisters pale. You will reswear the 3 oaths, or you will go to the headsman's block immediately. You cannot do this. One of the sisters pushed her way forward, defiance written across her face. I will not be treated like this. I am Aes Sedai, there are laws. Siwin just smiled. The Hall has already decided. Any of the accused dark friends who refuses to reswear the oaths here and now will be found guilty of being part of the Black Adger, with the penalty applied immediately. Should you reswear them, well then there is potential for other options to be discussed. The Tower Aes Sedai blanched, then shook her head, defiance in her tone. I will not be treated like this. Very well. Siwin shrugged, impressively cold. This is your last chance to change your mind. The Aes Sedai just stared defiantly at her until Siwin gestured. The woman was immediately seized by a pair of warders and dragged over to the wooden block before being forced down onto it. One drew his sword, and seconds later it was over, her blood pumping onto the grass. Taija gave Siwin a mental nod of approval. Dark friends were a plague on the world, and there could be no mercy. If they had tried to return to the light of their own volition, then there would be something to discuss. People could redeem themselves, but it had to be their choice, their actions. As it was, fuck them. Next. Siwin cast her eyes back to the shielded sisters, and one was pushed forward. What about you, Carrion? Will you reswear the oaths? Carrion glanced to the headless corpse and back at Siwin and hurriedly nodded, words seeming to have temporarily failed her. It doesn't take long for her to unswear whatever oath she had sworn. Taija would have to ask Verin about them and reswear the Aes Sedai's 3 oaths. Are you a member of the Black Adger? No, I am not, Siwin sighed loudly. Have you ever been a member of the Black Adger, and if so, when do you consider yourself to have stopped? Carrion looked like she didn't want to answer, and then swallowed nervously. Yes, I have been. However, I am no longer a member. I wish to walk in the light. I can tell you the secrets of the Black Adger. Very well, I will of course take your cooperation into account. Who do you know or suspect is a member of the Black Adger? Taija listened with interest as Black Adger member after Black Adger member reswore the oaths and frantically, almost eagerly betrayed their comrades. Nearly all of the names that were given were already on the list, but a few seemed to be surprises. Two were right there in the watching crowd. They made themselves obvious with their reactions to being named. They were immediately shielded and dragged forward to join the small line of Black Sisters. One more name resulted in a quick search and an angry expression from Siwan when it was reported that she'd left the village the night before. It wasn't long before the final two newly revealed sisters were brought forward. Taija didn't recognize either of them. The first reswore the oaths and was quickly revealed as yet another member of the Black Adger, so it seemed Verin's list wasn't perfect. That would have been too much to hope for. Then the other angrily reswore the oaths and declared with an ice-cold tone, I am not nor have I ever been a member of the Black Adger. I am not a dark friend and have always walked in the light. She was actually trembling a bit, whether from rage or fear Taija wasn't sure. Siwan quickly gestured, and the shield on her was released. My apologies, daughter, we had to be sure. Let it be known that Gwenel Call is not a dark friend and has proven her innocence in front of the tower. She turned angry eyes on the Black Sister that had named Gwenel. Explain, now. The dark friend visibly shrunk in on herself. I thought she was. You asked if I suspected anyone, not just if I knew. I did not know for sure. HMPH. Very well. Siwan turned away, towards the sitters gathered behind her. You have seen these women swear the 3 oaths, and every one of them insists that they will cooperate and wish to serve the light. I told them that if they reswore the oaths, there would be potential for other options. Here is that potential. The hall will now vote on their fate, taking into account the cooperation they have provided. Personally, I say that they are only claiming to have changed to save their own skins. A lionfish in Roundfish's clothing remains a lionfish. I believe they will return to the shadow as soon as the opportunity is given to them, but it shall not be my choice. Megan then spoke. Those who vote for execution for all of the self-confessed members of the Black Adger stand. Every single sitter stood without hesitation, although Taija thought that at least 1 or 2 of the kneeling Black Sisters might have been among them a couple of days ago. Very well, we have the greater consensus. It all happened very quickly after that. There was no further discussion. Each sister was dragged forward, beheaded, and then her corpse hauled away to make room for the next. Some were too stunned to react, others begged, and 1 or 2 raged against the decision. Taija watched each one with a vague sense of satisfaction. This would significantly strengthen the light and make Siyun's group more able to fight at her side. Of course, there were many more Black Sisters outside Siyun's village, especially those that had stayed out of the White Tower split. Still, many of those would be suffering accidents over the next few days. Taija doubted they'd all be successfully dealt with, but a further trimming of the Black Adger's numbers would do the world some good. As sister after sister was summarily beheaded, her mind went back to Verin. She'd need to ask her what she wanted to do. Verin had struck a blow for the light that was probably greater than almost any modern Aes Sedai. If she wanted, Taija would keep her involvement a complete secret and ask Cadsuane, Nynaeve, and Tel to do the same. Otherwise, some kind of public declaration might be appropriate. She wanted to make sure that Verin didn't get overzealously caught up in a purge after being named by another Black Adger member after all. When the last sister had been executed, Siwan spoke again, breaking the stunned silence. Once again, Taija and the Hall of Servants have the White Tower's gratitude. Working together, we have struck a blow for the light. As part of this, the White Tower and the Hall of Servants have been discussing a historic agreement that will strengthen both of us. For the first time ever, the White Tower will enter into a treaty of friendship and recognition with another organization of channelers. There was definitely some tightening of eyes among the Tower Aes Sedai at that. 2 servants carried a table over, 2 large sheets of parchment on it. If everything had been done correctly, they'd be identical copies of the treaty that Taija's comrades in the hall had quietly been negotiating in the background since she'd obtained the binding rod. With a wave, Siwan gestured her forward to it, and Taija gave the papers a quick scan. It was, as expected, covering all of the key points that she wanted. Mutual recognition of Aes Sedai raised by each organization, acknowledging them as having the right to call themselves Aes Sedai and be accorded the respect that went with the title, effectively recognizing reality there. Acceptance that the internal governance of each organization was for them alone to decide. Neither of them wanted the other interfering, but it was probably more to Taija's advantage, as, unlike the White Tower, she wasn't particularly interested in getting involved in other groups' internal politics. Recognition that Aes Sedai from either organization could join the other if they so wished, and be governed by the other's rules if accepted. Taija suspected that Siwan had only agreed to that one with an eye on dominance after the last battle. On the other hand, she'd had Benny in mind, and the hope that others would follow. Recognition that the Hall could not in the future take novices and accepted from the White Tower, or vice versa. Not that that was a risk, unless, and until the White Tower consented, or they had been turned out. That was the biggest concession Taija had made, but it was bending to reality. It was also necessary to get the White Tower to relinquish its claims over the existing defectors among the Hall's ranks. She didn't want them to be looking over their shoulders constantly in case they were brought back as runaways. The Hall gave the Tower the binding rod to be theirs in perpetuity, but in return, the Tower agreed that the Hall would be permitted to borrow it when they needed to use it for their own purposes. Taija had made sure that the impression was given to Siwan that it would be used for rooting out dark friends and administering punishments. She didn't think Siwan had realized yet that she could make the Hall a much more attractive prospect by offering Aes Sedai the opportunity to unbind themselves if they joined it. General declarations of friendship and cooperation. Taija had no doubt the Tower would stab her in the back at the first opportunity after the last battle, but at least it wouldn't be in the front after Siwan had signed the treaty. Taija took the pen she was offered and dipped it in the ink pot. What wouldn't she have given for a ballpoint pen, and then signed both copies with a flourish. Taija Kosola Murinen, first among servants. Chapter 138. Interlude Roman 34 Dilemmas Moral and Otherwise Part I. Chapter text Interlude Roman 30 4 Dilemmas Moral and Otherwise Part 1. Siwan let out a breath as she returned to the privacy of her office. The day had been a huge success all in all. The oath rod was restored to her. The curse of the Black Adger had been dealt with, if not everywhere, then at least among her own people. Every Aes Sedai in her faction would be reswearing the 3 oaths in front of witnesses, and that would deal with any further members. The Tower was also reunited. Eleda's declaration would see to that. What was left of it anyway? What to do with her was the question, the fury that Siwan still felt at the thought of Lean, and what had been done to the Tower coursed through her, but Taija, damn her, had had a point. Was it worth expending political capital to save Eleda's miserable hide, or should she hang it up to dry amidst the nets? A decision for later. For now, she needed to finish assigning the teams that would be going out to snatch those members of the Black Adger that they knew the location of. Hopefully, it would be before any warning could reach them. She had been tempted to ask for Taija's help with that. No doubt the woman would have given it without hesitation. She had wondered how she would react to the executions. Some of her views really were quite soft, but they had not seemed to trouble her in the slightest. Perhaps unsurprising given her attitude to dark friends. There was also the return to the White Tower to organize. Light only knew what kind of condition it had been left in. It was difficult, owing so much to a woman who was so thoroughly and deeply irritating. If Taija could spend a few years as a novice, for seasoning, it would be to the benefit of everybody. It truly was a pity Taija had turned down her offer of joining the Tower. Her views were naive, but they had their strengths. If they could be combined with the strengths of the White Tower, both they and the world would benefit from it. Sadly, that was no longer a viable prospect. Demandred looked tame over, resisting the urge to sneer. There was no point in being unnecessarily unpleasant to subordinates, no matter how unimpressive he found them. The man had not failed him, even if he was not living up to what Demandred had hoped was his potential. Still, this would solve things one way or another. Tame would deal with a thorn in the shadow's side and start to rise in its ranks, or he would fail, in which case he would be suitably punished by Demandred, or die making the attempt, of course. You have your orders. He saw Tame's mouth start to open, anticipated the protest. I am not sending you to die pointlessly, take this. Demandrid reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin golden bracelet, dancing figures etched into it. This is an angriel, do you know what that is? Tame's eyes widened. I do. Good, the ignorant barbarian was not completely ignorant. Very well. I am not sending you on a suicide mission. I expect you to succeed. Do so and you will be rewarded. Fail and I will make you wish you had died. Are we clear? Tame nodded spasmodically. Good. With the angriel and surprise on his side, Tame should be able to succeed. It was infuriating how rare the things were in this time, but his own one was stronger, and he would rather a subordinate like Tame had it than a real threat like Moradin. Aleda knelt in front of the hall of the tower, eyes downcast. She had not been present while her fate was discussed, but when she had been brought in, she had been able to see from the hard faces of the sitters that she had no friends in this room. Hardly a surprise. She doubted she had friends left anywhere. Ironic to think that the person who had shown the most concern over her continued existence in the last few days was someone she had publicly declared to be a dark friend. Another misjudgment among so many. Siwyn stood from her chair. Aleda Davranir Rohan, the hall of the tower has sat in judgment upon you. Tower law is clear. The only punishment for falsely claiming to be Amuelin is stilling. Aleda felt her stomach clench. She had known this was the likely outcome, but had still hoped. However, hope sparked back to life in her heart. There are extenuating circumstances. The hall has discussed the matter. You were led astray by one of the Forsaken, deceived. The White Tower does not accept excuses, but in this case the last battle is coming. The Light cannot afford to throw away its servants. Therefore you will be allowed to continue to be Aes Sedai. This is subject to a number of conditions. Aleda was so relieved that she could barely hear the list of penances and restrictions that Siwyn was setting out. She would not be stilled. She would be able to serve the light. It was enough. Certainly more than she deserved. Siwyn looked up at the tower for the first time in over a year. It looked battered. Burn marks traced their way up it. The walls of the courtyard she was stood in were simply gone in places. Worst of all was the whole board straight through it, as if it was a simple block of wood at the carpenter's. Still, it was home, and it was hers once more. The white flame of Tar Valon would fly again. Megan came up to her, looking grim. It is as we had feared. The Black Adger emptied the Angriel and Sangriel stores. We think a number of the Turangriel are missing too, but there are too many for us to have a full accounting. I will let you know once we have that. Fish guts. I suppose it would have been too much to hope for that the blacks would have left those behind for us. We shall have to make to do as ever. What is important is that we are home and the White Tower stands. She had a lot of work to do. Logistics, organization, re-establishing control over the city, finding out what else was gone. There were also raisings to be done. 2 accepted to test and raise, plus Padol, of course, although he would be excused the testing. A number of novices would need to be tested to become accepted too. That was just the day-to-day business of the tower. Of course, she also had to think about the future, the war with the shadow. Alexei sat back and took a long gulp of water as he watched Lan and Tel spar. They circled each other, eyes never wavering, as they took slow steps to the side. Then suddenly Lan moved, striking almost too fast for Alexei to follow. Tel's sword was already there, though, deflecting the slash. The cracks of their training swords impacting on each other echoed across the training ground as they exchanged a blindingly fast flurry of blows. Then they were apart, circling each other as if nothing had happened. Again they came together and split apart, and again, neither able to score a blow. It was fascinating to watch. Taija had mentioned that Tel had been one of the best alive in her time, famous around the world for his skills. Alexei could certainly believe it. Impressively, Lan seemed to be a relatively even match for him. While neither was trying to kill the other, there was a definite tension there. Nothing like the relaxed friendliness that Tel gave off when he trained with Alexei. Nothing to be done there. Lan was more than justified in his dislike. Over the next few minutes, each scored a few times on the other. Tel always said that if you won all the time when you were sparring then, you had learnt nothing from the bout. So hopefully, they both felt they'd learnt something. When they decided they had had enough of their spar, they both bowed to each other. Lan's bow was perfectly calculated politeness, not an inch lower than required. Tell gave him a lower bow, though. The man did try light damn him. As Lan stalked off, Alexei saw the momentary tightening of Tell's eyes, the distant look. He must be lonely in his position. Of course, the initiates all looked up to him. But other than that, as far as Alexei could tell, the only people who would willingly spend their free time with him were Taija, Rand, and oddly enough, Benny. It was still far more than he deserved. Obviously, Alexei's sympathy for a man who had done what Tell had done was more than limited. However, it still hit him occasionally when Tell would let some sign of his feelings slip through his cheerful mask. He was clearly a tormented man. Alexei got to his feet. "Ground me with my staff, you with your sword." Tell jumped, refocusing on Alexei and giving him a smile. All signs of his previous mien gone. Of course, just something light, though. Land's so good it's exhausting. Absolutely. Alexei grabbed his staff and strode out into the ring. They both bowed to each other. At least there was no tension there. Alexei made the first move, leaping forward, sweeping the tip of his staff towards Tell's head, before reversing the swing to attack his legs with the other end. Tell effortlessly leant out of the way before forcing Alexei back with a flurry of blows. "Nice, but you'll have to be sneakier than that, Alexei. You did ask me to go easy on you, didn't you?" "Ha!" Tell's sword flickered out, lightning fast, probing for openings in his defenses. As they settled into rhythm, circling, maneuvering, and exchanging blows with each other, Alexei sighed internally. Tell had proven he was trustworthy. He was probably the third most important single person to the forces of the light, and he made Taija happy after everything she'd gone through. Did usefulness absolve someone of their sins? Could good actions wash away someone's past? He ducked under a blow and jabbed out with his staff, hooking it behind one of Tell's ankles and nearly taking him off his feet. "Oh, very good." Tell backed off and then seemed to somehow slide past Alexei's whirling staff, slipping into his space and hooking an ankle with his foot before pushing him to the ground. With a grunt, Alexei took Tell's extended hand and hauled himself back to his feet. "I still don't understand how you can move so fast. Decades upon decades of practice. Something for you to look forward to." "Ha, I suppose I can." Tell was tolerated, but everyone who knew his secret kept their distance from him. He could see the pain it caused the man, but he could also see that Tell was never going to utter a word of complaint, even as it ground him down. Was forgiveness even possible? A normal life? Even if people did forgive him, did that mean they had to welcome him? It was a conundrum. Ultimately, he was no philosopher. Leave that to people better suited for it. If Tell was doing his best, and he was, then that was a start. More importantly, he made Taija smile every day. If she had decided that Tell deserved to be not just tolerated, but welcomed, then maybe that should be enough for him too. He'd leave the moral conundrums to people who actually enjoyed them. "So, Tell, how exactly did you start with learning the sword? I thought your time was meant to be peaceful with no fighting at all until the boar." Perhaps he could learn something he could use for revenge on Taija too. He owed her for Melin, in both senses of the word. Helping Taija's lover, and finding some way to get back at her at the same time would be perfect. Chapter 139. Interlude Roman 35, Dilemmas Moral and Otherwise, Part Roman 2. Chapter text Interlude Roman 35, Dilemmas Moral and Otherwise, Part Roman 2. Mazrim Tame stalked back into the hall, the scowl on his face ensuring that no one tried to speak to him. Not that many people there would have wanted to anyway. It seemed that his time there was almost up. Demandrid's orders had been clear. He had a few days to look for the right opportunity. But if it did not present itself, he was to act anyway. If he was a softer man, he would have shivered at the thought of the punishments Demandrid would inflict for failure. He scowled harder. Why had the light forsaken him the way it had? He just wanted to be strong enough to survive, not to be forced to choose between naive fools who had no idea how to even use their strength and outright evil. He cast a contemptuous look at a group of laughing initiates. They would learn sooner or later, probably sooner. The world was not a bright or happy place. It would betray them, chew them up, and spit them out. The same way it had him. What did he really want? He could not answer that question, not even in the privacy of his own head, because he did not know. Did he want to rule over a world dominated by the shadow? Not particularly, but he would rather do that than die, particularly at Demandrid's hands. Did he want to be Aes Sedai, serve under, or even with Taija and Tell? Not in the slightest. With a growl of frustration, he turned towards Noryuan's rooms. He should at least say goodbye to the man before he did anything. Noryuan sat, staring at the wall, as Nynaeve Sedai muttered to herself. He hated having to sit here while she or Damer experimented on him. It was just yet another reminder of what he had lost, of the gaping hole inside him. He knew it was pointless to try to heal it. Everyone knew that. However, there was little point in telling her to stop. He had nothing better to do other than sit there and wait to die. He might as well let her indulge herself. He wasn't sure he was brave enough to tell her no anyway. He wasn't sure how long he put up with her poking when his door slammed open and Mazrim stalked in, looking even more thunderously moody than usual. It still made his heart skip a beat when he saw him. The only person he truly believed cared about him now, it would be hard to just keep on disappointing him. Nynaeve Sedai's eyebrows rose at Mazrim's rude entrance. As soon as their eyes met, he gave a shallow bow. My apologies. I had not realized Noryuan was busy. Mazrim turned to leave, but stopped when Nynaeve Sedai called out, Wait, I was just about done anyway. I'll leave you in peace. Thank you, Noryuan. She gave him a small bow before gathering her skirts and headed for the door. Mazrim hesitated, and then, to Noryuan's relief, didn't follow after her. Instead, he advanced further into the room before collapsing bonelessly onto the bed, his customary scowl etched even deeper than usual onto his face as he stared at the ceiling for long seconds. Noryuan was about to say something, anything to break the silence when Mazrim spoke. Do you ever wonder why life treats us so poorly? You know, when the White Tower gentles a man, they say that the Creator has turned his eyes from them for channeling. I often wonder whether that was true. Noryuan winced at the memory that brought uncontrollable shivers running through him. Hard-faced Aes Sedai staring down at him, that tearing feeling. Mazrim didn't seem to notice. Everything we do, the world acts against us. We seek peace, and we are rewarded with suffering. Even when we try to avoid it, the wheel drags us back onto the path of disaster. He needed to stop shivering. Mazrim despised weakness, and the last thing Noryuan wanted was for him to stop visiting. He couldn't, though. More and more memories, the joy of Sedin, those Aes Sedai, death all around him. You try to be a better person, and the world spits it back into your face. In the end, all that matters is strength, and even then you find that that is not enough. There was clearly something bothering Mazrim. This was not at all normal for him. Noryuan tried again to force himself to calm down. Why, you're the strongest person I know, Mazrim. That got him a short, cold laugh. If only you knew, Noryuan, if only you knew. Equals. And then he was just ready to go again. Egwene reminded herself not to look too wide-eyed at Nynaeve's story. Well, it seems that married life is agreeing with you. What in the light had happened to the woman? She was normally so prudish, and now she was just boastful. Was having a husband truly that exciting? To be honest, she didn't really want to hear it at all, but the woman seemed desperate to tell people. Hello, girls. What's up? Egwene saw Nynaeve wince out of the corner of her eye as Taija seemed to appear from nowhere. Perhaps this would be an opportunity to get Nynaeve to shut up about Lan's prowess. Oh, Nynaeve was just telling me about what she and Lan had been getting up to. Apparently she's been having all kinds of creative adventures. Being married is letting her do things that would make a tavern girl blush. Egwene happily ignored the utterly betrayed look in Nynaeve's eyes as Taija suddenly looked interested. Oh, really? How fascinating. What sort of things? Nynaeve looked like she might wilt for a second, but then she gathered herself, some of her pride returning. Well, there was this one thing he does that I don't think anyone else knows how to. Egwene tuned out the boastful repetition, instead watching Taija nod, her eyes widening. Gosh, well, I'm glad you're having fun. Lan must be very creative. What do young people get up to these days, eh, Egwene? Nynaeve preened, failing to see the obvious trap in her pride. Well, Taija interrupted her. Yes, that's very cute. You know, we had a book in my time all about this sort of thing. I once went through the whole thing over the course of a couple of months. She looked distant, as she often did when she talked about the past. Maybe I should try to rewrite it. Anyway, there was one thing that I think you'd like. Egwene listened wide-eyed as Taija descended into absolute filth, and Nynaeve slowly tried to curl into a ball while her eyes darted frantically, looking for a way to escape. Hopefully, the bloody woman would shut up about Lan after this. Still, some of the ideas were interesting. Hadn't Rand just returned Galad and Goyne to Keemlin? Benny tutted to herself as Egwene looked over the weave she had just produced with a critical eye. Not bad, Benny, but you still need to work on the precision of your flows. The light of Sedar brightened around her, and she wove a fine net of spirit. The exercise I found helped me most was to make a simple net, and then try to reduce the amount of power I put into each individual flow. Doing that again and again helped, but ultimately it was just a matter of practice. Advice given, the girl moved on to the next aspirant. Benny suppressed the irritation that ran through her at being corrected by a girl who had not even been able to channel 2 years ago. Fortunately, she was good at concealing her feelings. She had made a decision, and she would follow through on it. The fact that Egwene clearly could weave with more precision than her did not help her mood, but it did help her to accept the situation. She was still Aes Sedai, of course, but she could accept her temporarily reduced status for now, in the knowledge that if she really wanted to, she could walk away at any time and continue to call herself Aes Sedai. Anyway, there were benefits. She felt decades younger already. The ageless look had faded from her face within a couple of days, but what was more interesting was what had replaced it. She now looked like a woman comfortably into her middle years, rather than someone staring their impending death of old age in the eye. That alone was worth all number of sacrifices. Shortly afterwards, Egwene dismissed the class and they filed away. Benny followed after them. While the other aspirants were friendly, it was a polite, distant friendliness. They had not forgotten that she was Aes Sedai, Tower Aes Sedai at that, and they did not truly treat her as one of them. It was probably a good thing. She was most likely 3 or 4 times the age of the next oldest. Still, it did make life a little less interesting. With the completion of the class, her own timetable for the day was finished, which was fortunate, as she had plans for the evening. Tell was ever such a lonely man, behind the facade he put up, quite vulnerable to a sympathetic ear. It was fascinating to see the weaknesses in a former Forsaken's personality. Since Taija was off, doing the creator knew what that evening it gave her an opportunity to further her own plans. That was why that evening, Benny found herself stepping through Tell's gateway into Keemlin and making her way into a well kept in with him. To think, drinking with one of the Forsaken. She still had not decided whether she approved of him or not. Of course, Taija, the light-blasted woman, had circumvented her careful plans in that regard by taking matters into her own hands. There was nothing to be done about that. One thing she had quickly learnt about Taija, once she was not bound by the need to pretend to be someone else, was that she would largely do what she wanted and seemed to subconsciously expect the rest of the world to work around it. Benny clinked her goblet against Tell's and took a sip of her ale. It was not bad at all. There was a reason she had chosen this place. Tell in turn took a long pull of his own. So did you hear about what Nalia said to the Eligner Lord on the most recent mission there? No, he leant in slightly, but I'm sure you're going to tell me. The man was an inveterate gossip, not so far off Taija when she was feeling sufficiently relaxed. Benny did wonder whether it was something common to their time or just a characteristic that they shared. Well, there is a young lord there who she has caught the eye of. When he expressed his interest in her, very romantically might I add, she informed him that she hoped he did not think she was impressed by his title and that real men earned their position, and she looked forward to hearing why he thought he was worthy beyond having fancy parents the next time she visited. Sometimes she worried about the ideas Taija was putting in these people's heads. Oh, light, children. Indeed. She allowed herself to share a smile with him before taking another drink. At least he was entertaining company, and should she decide he was unworthy of Taija, well, it would make things easier if he trusted her. Empress Fortuona, Athim Devi Pendrag, smiled to herself as the High Lord retreated backwards from the throne room. The damage wrought by the Merethdamine had almost been the downfall of the Empire, but it now stood united once more. The rebel lords had been put down. Last of her siblings was no longer among the living, and the Empire stood united once more. Just as importantly, it could never happen again. Now everyone of any importance was subjected to a slicing weave by a damine on a regular basis, by order of the Crystal Throne. There would be no more hidden Merethdamine walking among them. It was time to turn her mind back to the return. The Empire needed a cause to unite it after all. This time, though, there would be no slow, dangerous crossing of the sea. No, the damning Lena, before her unfortunate disappearance, had given the Empire a great gift. Egwene focused on need once more. This summer was unnatural. If it continued for much longer, half the world would die from drought. There must be a solution. The world moved around her. A city, interesting. Canals, architecture she didn't recognize. Unless, it did look rather like the descriptions she'd heard of Ebu Dar. She focused on need again, and the world shifted. A run down street. One more time she was inside a decrepit room, chests full of objects around her. One last time. Her hand descended onto a chest, opening it to reveal an ornate bowl. A Turangriel. It must be. She would need to go outside to try to memorize the location and check that this was in fact Ebu Dar, then she would let Taija know what she'd found. Chapter 140. I Believe in Miracles. Chapter text chapter I believe in miracles, so you think you've found a solution to the weather in the unseen world. Taija had known that there was something wrong with it, but with everything else on her mind, she'd hardly had the mental attention to devote to looking for a solution. It was a relief that Egwene had gone off and taken the initiative. Yet another confirmation that she'd been right to promote her to Aes Sedai. Egwene nodded. I think it must be a Turangriel of some kind. It looks like a large glass bowl. Perhaps a weather control engriel. I don't think the ones from my time looked like that, but who knows? What I don't understand is how a single Turangriel can change the weather for the whole planet. It took quite a lot. It was frustrating how little Taija could remember about the way her time dealt with weather control. Circles and engriel certainly, each for a small region, but not what they actually looked like or how they worked. People sometimes seem to believe she should know everything about her time, as if they could all be nobles, blacksmiths, seamstresses, and farmers at the same time. Egwene shrugged. It's what the unseen world led me to, so there must be a way. Yes, people now do seem to be a bit more skilled at manipulating weather. That had certainly been a surprise, not that it had stopped Taija from stealing their methods as soon as she saw them. Perhaps it was made after I left, or it would work better with modern-day weatherworking skills. That would make sense, although it wasn't obvious how to use it just from looking at it. Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Do you think you can find it in the real world? I hope so. Egwene looked a bit unsure, definitely with a bit of searching. Right, good. I think you should go to Ebu Dar then, maybe with Elaine as well. She's been keen to get away from here recently. Egwene nodded at that. Of course, you probably can't spare any more than the two of us from the Hall's Eyes, said I, but we're enough to deal with most problems, and we'll make a decent embassy to the Ebu Dari. Exactly. You can take angriels from our store for it too. That'll be enough to give anyone a nasty shock. They both shared a small smirk. Make sure to keep them disguised, though. Of course, thank you. No, thank you. I go myself, but Taija gestured vaguely around herself. If you need help for whatever reason, then we'll be ready to intervene here too. Just come running, and we can have 20 or 30 channelers in Ebu Dar in minutes. Now, back up. If Elaine goes, then Matt will go too, and he's handy in a fight. You should probably have at least a couple of men from the Hall as well. Ye's an aspirant now, and very reliable as well as being able to fight. Take him. Have a think about whether you want any other aspirants, and I'll think about it too. At least one decent healer. It would be good to get some proper outreach work done while you're out there. It was funny to think of Egwene as the girl who'd clumsily tried to blackmail her in the White Tower so little time ago. Now Taija saw a young woman who she knew she could rely upon to be sensible, skilled, and smart. One thing that Taija had decided on, after all of the excitement with the White Tower, was that she needed to be putting more effort into developing the Hall and its initiates. They were progressing well. Frighteningly fast in some cases, actually. She supposed it was in part because her, Tell and the rest were constantly pushing, but also people from the modern day were just more mature. They knew that they were in a war with the Shadow, and in many cases, that if they failed in the Hall then, they had little to go back to. It wasn't the comfortable, almost luxurious world of her own training. It meant the initiates weren't relaxing or goofing off anywhere near as much as Taija would have expected, which was good. Still, there was more she could do. Taija had a few ideas that she was going to be implementing over the next few weeks. Some larger exercises, for one thing. She'd also been thinking about some of the things that she didn't have much talent in, but which could be tested for. Quendela, Turangriel, among other things. There were enough of them in the hall that there must have been some interesting things going on that she hadn't spotted. Taija was pulled away from the class she was teaching on inverting webs by the sound of a commotion nearby. She tried to ignore it, but it just seemed to be getting louder. In the end, with an irritated growl, Taija told the aspirant she'd be right back and headed off to investigate. A bit of boisterousness was one thing, but this commotion was too much. Of course, her class trailed after her because, obviously, Taija quickly came across a crowd of initiates excitedly shouting to each other. "What's going on? Quieten down." Only the ones nearest to her even heard her. After a moment, Taija spun a web to amplify her voice. "What's going on? Stop this racket." Her voice boomed out and was rapidly followed by silence. They made way for her as she moved to the center of the crowd. The Taija saw Eben and Noryun both standing there, tears shining in their eyes. Slightly embarrassed aspirants and initiates stood awkwardly around them. "What's going on?" Taija asked again, moderating her voice. If they'd been doing something to those poor boys, there were going to be problems. It was Eben that answered, no sadness at all in his voice despite the tears, just joy. "She did it. She actually did it." "Did what?" "Healed us." Words appeared in the air, spelling out his name. A basic exercise, but oh light, she actually did it. Taija felt a grin growing on her face. Suddenly all the noise seemed more than understandable. She wanted to join in. "That's incredible. I'm so happy for both of you. We'll need to celebrate this. This is incredible." In her time, Nynaeve would have deserved a third name for rediscovering proper healing. If fourth names were a thing, she'd have deserved one for this. Like even Dama, as her assistant, might get a third name too for something that big. It was almost unbelievable. There'd need to be a celebration. It was huge news. Whatever twist of the pattern delivered Nynaeve into Taija's hands, she could only thank the Creator for it. It didn't take Taija long to find Nynaeve and Dama. They'd hidden themselves away in her office, presumably to escape all the congratulations. Well, tough luck to them. She was going to see them anyway. Taija knocked on the door and then went in. "Nynaeve, you're incredible. I thought it was impossible. I was wrong. I'm just speechless. No one figured anything out like that in my time, in thousands of years." Nynaeve actually blushed. It was the first time Taija had seen her do that. Well, other than when she was being wound up about Lan. Nynaeve normally put up such a front. Even when Taija had rescued her from the Cinchen, she'd managed to start trying to give orders. Dama helped a lot, actually. Really. I think if I hadn't done it, he would have managed a day or two later. It was a team effort. "Of course, Dama, everything I said to Nynaeve applies to you too." Taija hesitated and gave them both a low, deep bow of utmost respect. "The world is blessed by your presence." They both managed to look more embarrassed. Taija needed to pull herself together and get over her amazement. "All right, I'll stop praising you. For now, we'll still need to make a big thing of this. You deserve it, and it'll be good for the hall. We're going to need to celebrate, and for the two of you, if it was my time, you'd get third names for something like this." You see, when someone did something sufficiently impressive, they were awarded an additional name as a mark of honor. I suppose, sort of like being made a lord or something, but without any money or power to go with it. "Anyway, if you want," Nynaeve interrupted her. "I've lived my life with two names, and I'm perfectly happy with them, thank you very much." A moment later, she seemed to realize she might have been rude. "Of course, I thank you for the honor, but I'm not from your time, so it doesn't really mean the same." "All right, that's fine, that makes sense." Taija was too happy to be offended. "Dama," he just shrugged. "What Nynaeve said, really, but thank you." "All right, no worries." Nynaeve gave Taija a bit of a look. "I never really worked out why you always emphasized Murinen before. Why didn't you tell us?" It was Taija's turn to look a bit awkward. Well, it would have been very immodest to do that. "What did you get your third name for anyway, then?" Taija could tell Nynaeve was trying to turn the conversation back on her out of embarrassment, but she'd let her do it this once. Eben and Helena burst into Taija's office, practically arm in arm, laughing happily, and then saw her face and immediately sobered up, taking a step apart before giving her a low bow. "Taija Sedai, you wanted to see us." Taija sat behind her desk, with Tell stood at her shoulder, and looked at Eben and Helena over steepled fingers. Well, Helena, I can only hope that you can apply your stubbornness to something more appropriate in future. While what you did to Eben is and was wrong, you've taken your punishment, and it did undeniably help him to survive. Given that, Taija needed to be reasonable, she reminded herself. They were just kids. Now that Eben is healed, you can release his bond, and we can move on from this sorry episode. Taija had allowed Helena to return to classes and just do punishment duties during her free time after the first couple of weeks when it became clear she really was helping Eben and her temper had subsided a bit. But she'd still spent every free moment digging pointless holes. As had he really. Helena hesitated. Surely she wasn't going to argue. Then before she could speak, Eben looked at her, put his hand on her shoulder, and she gasped, her eyes widening and then staring into his. Wait, oh Light. He didn't. I can almost hear your thoughts. Helena's voice trailed off. Light, it's incredible. Taija buried her face in her hands. He did, for fuck's sake. She couldn't deal with this sheer stupidity. What the fuck was wrong with these people? While she was gathering her thoughts, they were just staring lovingly into each other's eyes. For fuck's sake. Eventually, Taija managed to speak. I don't really know what to say to the two of you at this point. You're both idiots. At least that pulled them away from each other. But you know what? Fuck it. Fine. You both want this, that much is clear. If I'm going to punish you until you stop being idiots, you'll be digging holes for the rest of your lives, and I don't have the patience for that. Eben, you insist you're an adult. I'm not sure I believe you, but whatever, fuck it. Helena, your punishment is over. Eben, I'm happy you're better. You'll both write an essay on informed consent and submit it to Aes Sedai for assessment. Taija ignored Tel's betrayed look. Now just, both of you get out of my sight. After they'd fled, Tel gave her a smile. They really are very cute, though. He was right, but Taija still gave him an unimpressed look. You're not helping. He just grinned. You know, Helena should really be an aspirant by now. She's clearly good enough, and then at least she'd be allowed to be bonded. Taija sighed. I know, but you know what? Fine, let's promote her. Then let's send them with Egwene and Elaine to Ebu Dar. The girls can look after their education for a while, and I won't need to think about them until they're back, by which point I might not want to strangle them anymore. They're perfect solution. Your wisdom is an inspiration to us all. Shut up, Tell. She scowled fondly at him. Speaking of promotions, though, should we be starting to think about Aes Sedai? At least he took that more seriously, pausing for a second to think. Actually, you may have a point. At least one or two of the men are there in terms of skill, and others are getting close. Same for the women. Philosophically, Tell barked a laugh. I'd never have thought you'd be able to get a load of peasants and teenagers to sit and listen to you pontificate on politics and philosophy, but it seems miracles do happen. He just laughed at Taija's annoyed growl until it turned into laughter of her own. Fine, you have a point. Apparently the secret is to beat people up in front of them. Ha! I do sometimes wonder whether there's something wrong with people from this time. I'm sure that's not how things used to work.